Chapter 392. The barrier around the training field had been shut down, and the people inside had walked out. Mogaz walked up to Cheto quickly and asked, "Are you all right, Cheto?" Cheto was covered in lightning and missing a piece of his shoulder. He looked like he was in a pretty bad shape. Even though he was wearing a suit of armor, it only served to cushion the impact. However, after Cheto put away his armor, the wound on his body started healing and returning to its original state in no time at all. The A squad couldn't believe that Cheto had healed himself in just a few breaths' time after taking the bomb at close range. Shusag and Shuechyo also walked up to Cheto and stood next to him. They were allies now, and Shusag didn't trust the A squad at all. He didn't care if they had to fight each other. Everyone except the 11th squad was an outsider to him. Cheto didn't answer Mogaz's question. Instead, he controlled the projectors in the training field to display the battle situation in other parts of the starship. Some robots were doing cleaning work there. The images were very clear, showing the battle between the robots and the escaped navigators. The command room had regained control of the starship as well. Under Cheto's control, the starship's barrier was raised once more. However, the starship itself didn't slow down at all. When the protective shield appeared on the surface of the starship, Carrie and the others knew that Sillin and the others had succeeded. The starship no longer had to endure the bombardment of the enemy aircrafts outside. The Sentinel defense system and AI weapons inside the starship had been activated, and after issuing a warning, they started attacking the enemy aircrafts around the starship. Cheto called Shusag and Shuechyo over to clean up the mess inside the training field. Although they had the help of the robots, there were still some things they had to do on their own. Cheto needed to gather some information on the dead navigators. Stanley didn't know what to say when he saw the people in front of him going about their business, as if no one else was around. Should he say thank you? Shouldn't he? Should he say hello? How should he say hello? It wasn't easy for Stanley to swallow his pride. That was why Stanley didn't say anything. Mogaz was the only one who was asking questions around Cheto. "Where's the captain, Cheto? Is Lord Cat here too? Where are the others?" "They have other things to do." "Shuechyo, that's still useful." "Don't break it," Cheto said to Shuechyo, who was playing with the ice block on Rodon's head like a ball. Shuechyo had already put away his armor and returned to his original furry white bear form. Hearing Cheto's words, Shuechyo obediently placed the things in his hands on the ground. After scratching his butt, Shuechyo, who could not bear the loneliness, wandered around the training ground again. He confiscated the firearms, lightsaber, and other tools left behind by Navigator to fill up his toy library. The members of the A-team were a little nervous when the fatty approached. Now the fatty looked very simple and honest and cute, but when they thought of this guy crushing a person to death with a slap, they couldn't help but feel nervous. With a dire beast so close to him, it would be strange if he wasn't nervous. However, Shuechyo didn't pay attention to the A-team members. He was focused on finding new toys. When he saw a new submachine gun in the hands of a member of the A-team, Shuechyo walked over and stared at the gun. The man who was being stared at by Snowball stiffened. He looked at the fatty who was staring at the gun in his hand without blinking, then looked at Stanley, who was deep in thought and did not seem to be paying attention to them. He swallowed his saliva and carefully said, "You want this?" Shuechyo scratched his ear with his paw and said, "Let me play with it for a bit. I'll return it to you later." "Will I really return it later? Also, will I really not get into trouble?" That being said, the person handed the gun to Cheto anyway. Someone shook his head disapprovingly, but he didn't say anything because Shusag was looking at him. They had all seen Shusag slaughter the navigators just now, and they didn't want to make an enemy out of him unless it was absolutely necessary. Even though they were all members of Vanguard, they treated each other like strangers. In fact, everyone in the A-team was confused by the fact that the strongest members of the 11th squad were Sillin, Cheto, and Lord Cat. Shusag wasn't mentioned. They had seen Cheto's strength for themselves, and they had a better understanding of Shusag's. If everyone in the 11th squad was as strong as Shusag, then they would have to re-evaluate their opinion of the 11th squad. But was Sillin really that strong? He wasn't that old, was he? Some people were wondering about the reason behind this when they were suddenly pulled back to reality by a series of gunshots. On the other side, Snowball was holding the submachine gun and shooting at the severely deformed door that was cut by the navigator. It was about 70 meters away from the door. After a series of shots, it left a circle of bullet marks on the door. It was a simple task for most people, but the white fatty in front of them wasn't a human. He was a special kind of animal. And this was just the beginning. Shueqiu scratched his ears after firing the submachine gun. No one knew what he was thinking. Then he moved his fat palms and disassembled the submachine gun, just when everyone thought he was going to break it in half. It was hard to imagine how Shueqiu had disassembled the submachine gun with his fat and clumsy palms, but it was an undeniable fact. After disassembling the submachine gun, Shueqiu studied the parts for a moment. Then, as if he had lost interest, he reassembled the parts and handed them back to the person. Compared to Tang Qiuqiu's gun, Shueqiu didn't find this one attractive at all. The person who received the submachine gun was still a little dazed. He only came back to his senses after his comrade patted him on the back. The first thing that came to his mind was, "Fuck, why did that white fatty look at me with disdain when he returned the submachine gun?" Mogaz asked about the starship again, but Cheto didn't say anything. Cheto didn't tell him where Sillin was. He could sense Sillin's current location. The reason he didn't kill the leader of the navigators right away was because he wanted to confirm that the detonation signal of the bomb in the energy cabin was successfully disrupted. It was only after the navigator gave the order to detonate the bomb, and nothing happened, that Cheto finally felt reassured enough to kill him. On the other side of the starship, inside a side passage leading to the energy cabin, the lights inside the starship had been turned on, so the passage was brightly lit. At this moment, a person was slowly walking toward them from the corner of the passage. Although the passage was brightly lit, it was impossible to see the person's face clearly. The person was wearing a cloak and a hat, and the light shone through the brim of the hat and cast a shadow. The person was fiddling with a device on his wrist in an attempt to contact someone, but he discovered that he couldn't send a message. The device had been disrupted. Suddenly, the device on his wrist vibrated and displayed a notification. The person paused for a moment when he saw the notification. He looked a little incredulous before he quickened his pace. However, he only took 2 steps before he came to a stop and looked up ahead. There was a person standing about 30 meters away from the other end of the passage. Blue succubus? Celine looked at the cloaked person not far away and asked. He was here to stop the last of the 3 FOG members on the starship. He was also the opponent that Sillin had met once before, and had even gotten beaten up by him. After Sillin revealed her identity, Blue Phantom pulled down her cloak and revealed a blue-skinned woman. "The captain of the 11th squad, Sillin?" Blue Phantom asked. They had seen some of the information about the 11th squad before they came here, so it was only natural that she knew about Sillin as the captain of the 11th squad. However, she couldn't understand why Sillin would appear on this starship again after he had handed over his authority. Regardless, the only thing Blue Phantom wanted to do right now was to detonate the bomb Navigator's men had planted inside the energy cabin. They had already lost 2 people in this mission, and if they couldn't complete it, there was no need for her to return. She didn't care even if she had to blow up the entire starship and kill everyone. In any case, she was the only one left of the 3 who had come here, and the other 2 signals on the vitals display on her wrist had already disappeared. She didn't need to worry about anything anymore. The moment the blue succubus finished her last word, she charged toward Sillin fiercely. Straight blue light blades extended from her hands, and her eyes were cold and emotionless. It was just like Sillin's memories. Kill Sillin, then go to the energy cabin and detonate the bomb. This was Blue Phantom's current mission. Ping! The blue blades of light were blocked with a hiss. Blue Phantom's pupils shrank when she saw the slender black blade that had blocked her blades of light. "It's you." It wasn't that Lan Mei recognized Celine, who they had fought before, but that she recognized the blade. "It's you. You killed Osculo." That was what Blue Phantom was trying to say. Blue Phantom was on high alert. Several blue blades of light crisscrossed and stabbed at Sillin. The crisscrossed blades of light wove into a deadly net, and the surrounding walls were already covered in crisscross marks. Sillin didn't wear his armor, nor did he take out his water gun. He didn't plan on using his Purgatory Thunder Snake either. All he did was wave the long blade in his hand and block the incoming blades of light. He kept on defending, retreating step by step. It looked like Sillin was being suppressed and at a disadvantage. But Blue Phantom knew that the person in front of her wasn't simple. There were no unnecessary movements. Every time Sillin swung his blade, he was able to perfectly block the blades of light. No matter what angle they came from, no matter how many blades of light came at him at the same time, he would always be able to block them. It was different. It was different from the feeling of being unable to attack or block. In Sillin's eyes, these flashing blue blades of light no longer gave off the frightening feeling they had in the past. They were just like ordinary blades, blades that he could definitely avoid with absolute certainty. It wasn't that the blue blades of light had lost their power, but that this level of power was no longer enough to suppress Sillin. Whether it was the speed at which he swung his blade, or the way in which he attacked each blue blade of light, Sillin felt as if there was a machine running at high speed inside his brain. It recorded every instant of his movements, analyzed his next move, and calculated the best way to deal with it. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The blue blades of light collided with the long blade of light, and the blue blades of light slashed against the wall. The blue blades of light on Blue Phantom's hands and fingers converged. There was only one blue blade of light in each hand, and the light they emitted was very strong. You could feel the energy colliding with each other. But Osculo's blade was indeed a good one. Even Blue Phantom's strengthened blade of light couldn't cut through it. Sillin blocked Blue Phantom's double blade attack again, but it was different this time. After blocking the attack, Sillin quickly retreated. The next moment, several deep marks appeared on the place where he had been standing, and the walls on both sides of the tunnel. Blue Phantom didn't only have two hands. It was just that she always gave people the impression that she only had two hands. Now Blue Phantom had two more hands, each of which was connected to a blue blade of light. It was a combination of finger blades of light. Blue Phantom didn't expect her surprise attack to fail, and it didn't even touch the corner of Sillin's shirt. Since this attack didn't work, it was obvious that it would be difficult to hurt Sillin later. Continuing would only buy more time. Retreat first, then find a chance to go to the energy cabin, or find another way to destroy the starship. Blue Phantom had just thought of retreating when she suddenly felt a chill run through her body. The air around her seemed to freeze. Every nerve in her body was trembling, as if she didn't know how to react. The blue succubus waved her arm in reverse according to the conditions. Her 6 arms instinctively bent, and the blue blades of light formed a protective net in front of her. This was a habit she had developed countless times. Bang! Blue Phantom's eyes widened as she watched the 3 arms on her left fall. It was too fast. She couldn't react at all. The blue blades of light that had been fighting against the long blade had now fallen to the ground along with the broken arms. Even the blue blades on the hands had disappeared, leaving only the severed hands. She didn't even finish a word. A line of blood extended from the right side of Blue Phantom's neck down to the left side of her waist. Blue blood, darker than her blue skin, flowed out of the wound, and it became more and more turbulent. Why? Blue Phantom felt that if Sillin could kill Osculo, then it would be difficult for her to kill Sillin. After fighting so many times, Blue Phantom knew that she wouldn't be able to easily finish off the person in front of her. But the last attack made Blue Phantom understand that Sillin hadn't used his full strength. In that moment, Blue Phantom felt like she was facing Osculo, the person who was on par with her boss, Nabila. Sillin clearly had this ability, so why did he fight with her for so long? Was he playing with her? She couldn't understand why Sillin, who had killed Osculos and become so powerful, would willingly stay in a contemptible squad like Vanguard. Why didn't anyone in GL pay attention to him? Why didn't anyone notice him when he had grown to such a level? Why didn't anyone notice him? Why didn't anyone notice him? This was what Blue Phantom didn't understand even in death. If they knew about this person, Nabila and the other stronger members of the Fog would have personally dealt with him instead of just sending the 3 of them to their deaths. Like Roten, Lan Mei had completely forgotten about the young man she had chased in the level 1 prison. He was someone she didn't even care about. But Sillin still remembered them. Sillin put away his knife and made a gesture. Not far behind Sillin, a robot slowly materialized into existence. Take her. Yes. The robot walked over and dragged Blue Phantom, who was already dead but still had a look of disbelief on her face before she died. Blue Phantom's eyes were still wide open. She didn't understand what had happened, nor did she expect Sillin to have such an ability. She died with her eyes wide open. Sillin didn't look at Blue Phantom, who was being dragged by the robot. He walked to the other end of the passage, where the power cabin was. There was a cat squatting at the door of the power cabin. The cat was nodding its head like a chicken pecking at rice. TSK, he could still sleep peacefully in this situation. Sillin asked Huimao to squat here and guard. He was to guard the bomb and prevent it from exploding. He was also to pay attention to the surroundings and prevent people from approaching this place. When Sillin approached, Huimao's ears twitched. Then he opened his squinted eyes and yawned. There was something suspicious stuck to his fangs. How many people did it swallow? Sillin asked. 2 or 3. I can't remember. As he spoke, Huimao yawned again. He stuck out his butt, stretched his back, shook his fur, and looked sideways at the person being dragged by the robot behind Sillin. Oh, it's already taken care of? Then let's hurry to the training ground and meet up with Cheto and the others. Huimao looked a little impatient. Wait, let's take care of the bomb first. Sillin grabbed Huimao, who was about to leave, and walked into the power cabin. With Huimao's help, Sillin took some time to take care of the bomb. Only after this bomb was taken care of would they be able to focus on other things. Otherwise, it would become a hidden danger. Half an hour later, Sillin passed the process bomb to another robot. The robot hugged the bomb and threw it out of the starship. After the bomb was thrown out, Sillin finally turned around and tidied up the somewhat messy power cabin. Then he grabbed Huimao and left. Sillin, shouldn't we ask for compensation this time? Huimao asked while waving his paws. Yes, that's for sure. At the training ground, the A squad members were huddled together and discussing something. Cheto and Shusag were busy with their own things, and Shueqia was having fun on his own. Suddenly, Cheto looked at the door. Sillin is back. Everyone in the training ground followed Cheto's gaze and looked toward the door. Footsteps and the familiar voice of Fat Cat entered the room. Finally, Sillin appeared. Shusag relaxed when he saw that Sillin was safe and sound. Hey, Captain, where are you guys going? Mogaz was about to say something, but he choked when he saw the person being dragged by the robot behind Sillin. The other A squad members choked as well. That was the third one. Chapter 393. The fog had only sent 3 assassins, or at least only 3 of them were known to the public. Moreover, all 3 of them had caused a lot of damage to the A squad. But what about now? First it was radon, then tires, and now the blue succubus that was being held by the robot. Stanley had to admit that he had made a mistake this time. Ji Feng had told him not to underestimate Sillin too much before he came here. Stanley didn't pay much attention to it at the time though. After this incident, he realized that Ji Feng might have underestimated Sillin, and the small squad behind Sillin. What the hell happened to this place? Huimao looked very unhappy when he saw the state of the training ground. Although he would still demand compensation from the A squad later, no one would be happy to see their turf destroyed like this. I'm so happy to see you again, Lord Cat. Mogaz ran up to Huimao and explained what happened just now to him. Everyone in the A team turned to Mogaz in unison when he called out, Lord Cat. Their eyes were filled with curiosity. Huimao's nose twitched a little before he jumped off Sillin's shoulder and ran up to the deformed metal door. Then he sniffed it, moved his ears, and lifted the thick metal door with his paw. It was so thick that it could easily crush a person to death. The A squad members couldn't help but feel their faces twitch when they saw this. Mogaz wasn't lying. They knew that the cat was a little special, but they didn't think it would be this special. Huimao didn't care what the others thought of him. He was after the thing under the metal door. After the thick metal door was lifted, everyone saw a person who was crushed to a bloody pulp under the door. However, Huimao's target wasn't the navigator, but the thing in the man's hand. Huimao picked up the deformed instrument with his paw and tossed it to Sillin. This thing is a little special, he said. Cheto looked at the seriously damaged device. He hadn't paid attention to it before, and the device itself had lost all of its functions due to damage. That was why he hadn't paid attention to it when he was cleaning up the training ground. He didn't expect Hui Mao to be the first one to find it. What is this? Sillin asked. I don't know. Hui Mao shook its paws to get rid of the blood and debris on its paws. It feels a little special. That's the device the navigator used to seal the starship's control system, said Stanley, who finally found a chance. Sillin shot Stanley a glance before passing the device to Cheto. Keep it for now. We'll show it to Shimu later. All right. Cheto accepted the device. There were some things he needed to ask Hui Mao later. Cheto was inferior to Hui Mao in judging things without relying on machine language and signal response, so he needed to improve himself in this area. Cheto had already taken care of a lot of things in the training ground and on the starship, so Sillin didn't need to worry about them anymore. Vice Commander Stanley, I think we need to have a good talk after this incident is over, said Sillin while looking at Stanley. I think so too. Stanley didn't know how he should treat Sillin right now, but it was true that they needed to have a talk. There were too many things he didn't understand about the 11th Squad. And how Vanguard should treat the 11th Squad from now on was a headache. Of course, now wasn't the time for a talk. The war between the two hunter regiments wasn't over just yet. Stanley needed to ask about the A Squad's current situation, but he didn't know how the other higher-ups were doing right now. While Stanley was contacting the front line, Sillin went to talk to the Mogaz Quintet, especially Pango. Pango was on the missed assassination list. While Sillin was talking to Pango, Pango told Sillin about his background. It was true that Pango was Ji Feng's son, but his mother wasn't a member of Vanguard. She was a member of Wuxia. Back then, Wuxia obtained 2 star map fragments of spell. Ji Feng had one, and the other was hidden somewhere else. Pango's mother betrayed Wuxia after she found the last star map fragment and found spell with Ji Feng's help. Spell, like Tear of God, was a kind of potion. However, spell contained a whole set of genes, and this set of genes would give a person a special ability. After Pango's mother drank the gene medicine, her strength skyrocketed. Later on, during a mission, they encountered an accident. The spaceship entered a star area with an abnormal magnetic field. Coupled with the sudden outburst of stellar activity in that area, the ion storm and all sorts of other unexpected events gathered together. In order to save Ji Feng and a few of Vanguard's higher-ups, Pango's mother did her best to protect them. However, she was already 7 months pregnant at that time, and her body was greatly affected. After that crisis, Pango arrived early, but his mother couldn't open her eyes again. Saving Pango had exhausted the last of her strength. At the time, many people thought that a premature baby who cried out under such circumstances wouldn't survive even in the best nursery. However, the baby's vitality was so strong that the entire nursery exploded when he cried. Later, Ji Feng and the others discovered that the spell gene originally found in Pango's mother was successfully duplicated in Pango's body. Not only did Pango inherit his mother's and father's high-level genes, but he also had the spell gene. Pango had 2 sets of genes at the same time. And as he grew up, he also slowly fused the 2 sets of genes in his body. Unlike his mother, Pango was born with 2 sets of genes. Compared to his mother, he had a bigger advantage. The 2 sets of genes in his body were much more compatible. His mother didn't fuse the 2 sets of genes before she died. She only fused 1/3 of the genes, but Pango managed to fuse 1/3 of the genes when he was 10. Ji Feng valued this child very much, so he didn't expose him. Just like Wuxia said, Ji Feng had many children in the open, so he didn't pay too much attention to them. However, he couldn't afford to lose Pango. The higher-ups who were saved by Pango's mother also helped to keep this secret. If nothing went wrong, this child would replace Ji Feng as the next leader of Vanguard, and he would be even stronger than Ji Feng. Pango was the one who made most of his decisions. Even though he appeared to be a very easygoing person, Ji Feng had never been able to persuade Pango to change his mind, even once after Pango had grown up. Back then, when Vanguard sent a large number of members to the other teams, Pango had chosen to join the 11th Squadron. At the time, Ji Feng didn't want to, but he let him be. At the same time, he secretly arranged Mao, Kong Lujia, and the rest of the stronger members to join the 11th Squad. However, Ji Feng didn't expect that other than Pango, Only 4 people would remain in the 11th squad. Mao and the rest didn't know about Pango at first, but when Ji Feng secretly contacted them, they were already prepared, so when Sillin talked to them, they didn't show any signs of abnormality. Sillin didn't care whose son Pango was, whether he was the future leader of Vanguard, or whether he was the bearer of spell. The only thing he cared about was the 11th squad. Sillin gave the 5 of them 2 choices. One was to leave the 11th squad and forget about this incident. They would still be members of the same Hunter Corps from now on, but they wouldn't be as close to each other as before. After all, being in the same team was like being a family. The second choice was to stay in the 11th squad. However, the 11th squad had its own rules, and they knew this from the moment they joined. Sillin was the leader of the 11th squad, and Sillin was the one who made all the decisions. When Sillin wasn't around, there was still the vice-captain. They could talk to the captain, the vice-captain, or any other member they trusted. They couldn't skip the 11th squad and accept orders from someone outside the squad, not even Ji Feng. It wasn't that Sillin was being too dictatorial, but the 11th squad had too many things that no one else had, including some huge secrets. If the 11th squad didn't work together as a team, they would run into all kinds of trouble in the future. This was also why Sillin didn't tell the 5 of them about the 11th squad's secrets. All 5 of them chose the second option. Pango might not be able to stay in the 11th squad forever. Ji Feng would definitely transfer him back to the 11th squad after he successfully fused the 2 genes together. Even if Pango didn't want to, Ji Feng would have to step down sooner or later. Sillin understood that Pango had a responsibility he couldn't escape from. However, Pango showed great sincerity. After his time in the 11th squad, Pango didn't want to join any other squad ever again. The 11th squad was a very special one, and he was very happy here. He was able to learn a lot of hunter and non-hunter knowledge. Moreover, every member of the 11th squad was very strong. Even their pets were several sectors ahead of the average hunter. The 5 of them chose to stay, but they were sent back to the probation period. Mogaz was confident that he would be able to regain his teammates' trust. After talking to Pango and the others, Sillin walked out of the room and saw Stanley walking toward him with a very ugly expression on his face. Stanley had contacted the A squad just now and learned that things weren't going well at the front line. 2 of the higher-ups were dead, and 5 were seriously injured. One of the injured was Bart, whom Sillin was familiar with. Somba Leruo managed to escape death this time. Of course, he wasn't sure if he was on the assassination list or not. The commander is also injured, so I'm going to head over there right now. As for this matter, we'll talk about it after the war is over, Stanley told Sillin. Sure. However, I hope you can keep your subordinates' mouths shut. There are some things that are better left unsaid. I know that. Oh right, that device doesn't look like something a navigator could have made. Stanley had a feeling that someone was adding fuel to the fire. At the same time, he tactfully told Sillin to let him know if he discovered anything. Stanley quickly led his men to the front line's central battlefield. He wasn't worried about Pango's safety, and he didn't want to get involved after seeing the 11th squad's freaks. It was better to talk to the commander about the 11th squad after the war was over. After Stanley left, Sillin recalled everyone from the 11th squad, including the spaceplane that Shikai and the others were on. Sillin didn't send any robots to participate in the war this time. First of all, there was a limit to the number of robots that could participate in the war. Some of them were still in the process of upgrading, and it wouldn't do them any good if they were forced to participate in the war. For example, the robots that fought against the navigators were stopped halfway through upgrading, so they weren't as domineering as they were against the Robert family's robots. Secondly, the Vanguard hunters might not want these metal men to join the battle. Unlike the Freedom Army, the hunters had their own way of thinking. They believed that their prey should be hunted by themselves, not to mention that the Vanguard hunters were in an advantageous position right now. A large number of robots joining the fray at a time like this would definitely upset the hunters. Moreover, they didn't trust robots. They were willing to use robots as cannon fodder, but they weren't willing to fight alongside robots. That was why Sillin didn't want to bring trouble to himself. Ah, how did my combat room collapse? Carrie roared from the other side of the room. My shooting target is paralyzed too, Tang Qiuqiu said with a cold expression. Thank goodness my indoor orchard wasn't trampled, Sigma said in relief. Sillin clapped his hands to silence everyone. Everyone, clean up your turf after the war and make a list. I'll ask for compensation from the A Squadron when the time comes. Will the A Squadron pay? Xiao Shang wasn't sure. I made an agreement with Stanley when I handed over the management rights, Sillin said. Oh, let's take care of the battlefield first. Get to your positions and prepare the starship for combat. Shimu, I've placed the device in your workshop. Take care of it first. After everything was settled, Sillin walked into his own lounge. The area was well sealed, so it wasn't affected by the war. He turned on his communicator and saw an encrypted message. It was from Kane Wuxia. After reading the message, Sillin informed Cheto, who was currently in control of the starship, that the starship's protective shield would be deactivated for 2 seconds. 2 seconds later, the shield would rise again. 2 seconds after the protective barrier was gone, Wheeze, who was huddled together with Moon and the others at the training ground and discussing about the penalty list, suddenly twitched its ears and looked around. Seeing that Cheto had gestured to it that it was fine, it flicked its ears and went back to work. Not long after, Sillin opened the lounge door and let a person in. Your starship's protective measures are pretty good, I see. The person didn't think of himself as a guest at all. He dragged a chair over, crossed his legs, and started examining Sillin's lounge. You sure aren't polite at all, Sillin said while looking at Kane Wuxia, who was rummaging through the food in his locker. The person sitting in the lounge was none other than the current leader of Wuxia, Kane Wuxia. He didn't look like a leader of an assassin organization at all. Everything about him looked very ordinary. You're asking for trouble. Kane Wuxia took out 2 bags of jerky and a couple of boxes of sweet sauce. You have a lot of good stuff here. Being close to the Food King sure is enviable. Sillin didn't answer. Instead, he looked at the white animal in Kane Wuxia's arms. Until now, he had only communicated with Kane Wuxia through the communicator. Now that he was seeing it with his own eyes, it felt even more different. Is it also a cyborg? Sillin asked as he looked at the little guy in Kane Wuxia's arms. It was using its claws to chew on a piece of jerky dipped in sweet sauce that Kane Wuxia had handed over to it. Yes, it's called ice cream. Its nickname is Lil Bing. It's cute, isn't it? Kane Wuxia was like a parent showing off his child. Ice cream. Lil Bing likes to eat ice cream, so I gave it this name. It likes it very much too. Kane Wuxia patted the head of the little guy in his arms. Ice cream, who was chewing on the jerky, squinted its eyes. No wonder Uncle Kane always had a box of ice cream to eat every time he saw him. Sillin didn't have any opinion on the name. He was now thinking about how Huimao would react if he saw these 2 guys eating the jerky in Sillin's locker. I heard that Commander Ji Feng is injured, Sillin said. There weren't many people who could injure or even seriously injure Ji Feng. Even if they used other tools, Ji Feng wouldn't let them get away with it easily given his experience. He won't die. Kane Wuxia replied in an indifferent tone. Then he asked, I heard that the 3 assassins Nabila sent to this place are all dead? How did you know? Actually, there should have been 3 more people who came to their aid, but we stopped them. Kane Wuxia didn't answer Sillin's question directly. It made sense. Blue Charm and the others couldn't send a message after Cheto regained control of the starship, so the fog probably had a backup plan. However, it turned out that Wuxia's men were the ones who stopped Sillin. After thinking for a moment, Sillin asked, You know about Pango, don't you? What do you want to know? Did you allow her to steal the incantation and the star map fragment on purpose? The she he was referring to was Pango's mother. Yes. Wuxia didn't deny it. I gave it to her because she wanted it. To be honest, I don't really care about that kind of thing. I just wanted to see if she had really decided to betray us. In the end, Pango's mother really did choose to betray them. No matter how strong a person is, they can't fight against the universe. She chose the path she chose, and she must bear the consequences including death, Kane Wuxia said calmly. Suddenly, little ice cream froze in Kane Wuxia's arms and stopped chewing. She tilted her head and looked at the door. Not long after, the door to the lounge opened, and a cat poked its head inside. Huimao, who was happy because of the ticket, immediately exploded when he saw the situation inside the lounge. Sillin covered his face. It looks like we're in trouble. Chapter 394. Put down my jerky. Huimao's fur stood on end. Its claws popped out and made a few holes in the floor. Ice Cream squinted at Huimao, then took a few bites of the jerky in its claws. It added fuel to the fire. Meow, how dare you be so arrogant in my territory? Sillin pulled Huimao back before it could pounce on him. Huimao, who was pulled back by Sillin, was still making threatening gestures. It stared at Ice Cream, who was nestled in Wuxia's arms warily. Wuxia looked at Huimao with interest. Sillin wasn't greedy for Olillo. He was calm, so the cat next to Sillin was definitely not bad. Huimao wasn't hostile to Lil Bing and Hua Xiaoheng, but it was on guard. It was only angry because Hua Xiaoheng took its food. Wuxia understood Hua Xiaoheng very well, just like how this little guy would get angry when other people in Wuxia ate Lil Bing's ice cream. If it was just on guard, it was a good sign. I'm sorry, little fat cat. We can actually pay for the food, Wuxia said. Hearing that it would pay, Huimao, who was struggling to pounce on it, flicked its ears. It calmed down a little, but its eyes were still vigilant. Will you really pay? Huimao asked. Yes. Huimao stretched out its claws. Double. Double. Wuxia answered so quickly that Huimao's anger subsided a little. However, when it said that it wanted to write a fine, it was mocked by Ice Cream. Damn fatty. Stinky rat, who are you talking about? I hate rats the most. Okay, calm down. You're a guest. Sillin scratched Huimao's chin. Huimao stared angrily at the two guys who were eating its food. It couldn't help but move its claws. Wuxia chuckled and patted the little guy in its arms. Go play. I have something to talk to Captain Sillin. Ice Cream had an unwilling look on his face as he slowly jumped out of Wuxia's arms and onto the table at the side. Sillin flicked Huimao's ears. Take the guest to play. We have something to talk about. Huimao's ears moved. Nobody knew what he was thinking. He said to Sillin, Sillin, give me my ball. When Huimao's ears moved, Sillin knew that Huimao was bullying again. Forget it. Let it be. Sillin took out Huimao's ball and threw it over. Huimao bent its forelimbs and caught it nimbly. It hooked its claws and played with the ball. Ice Cream, who was squatting at the side, looked at the ball under Huimao's claws. It would be a lie to say that it wasn't envious. Of course, it could see that the ball was special. Huimao played with it. Suddenly it picked up the ball. It jumped and flipped. It used its tail to whip the ball toward Ice Cream. Ice Cream was prepared, but it didn't dodge. Instead, it used its head to hit the ball and bounced it back. The two guys exchanged blows. The ball flew faster and faster. Ordinary people couldn't even follow it with their naked eyes. The two guys moved extremely fast. One moment, they were on the table. The next moment, they flashed to the cabinet. Huimao knew that the guy in front of it was a cyborg life form like itself. When it suddenly saw its own kind, it became competitive. In addition, the stinky mouse in front of it had eaten its horde. Therefore, Huimao's speed at whipping the ball became faster and faster. It would be best if it could teach the stinky mouse a lesson. Looking at the two guys playing with the ball, Wuxia was in a particularly good mood. The smile on its face deepened. Sillin, when did you get this? Wuxia asked. A few years ago. Selim briefly told Wuxia what had happened all those years ago, but he didn't mention anything about the white ball, leaving out some details. You're so lucky. You can encounter such a good thing while hunting. Wuxia said. I'm different from you. My family only has 10 years left. When I was at my most difficult time, this little guy helped me. My subordinate, who had been with me for 20 years, betrayed our entire organization for a man from another force. However, this animal was able to pull me back from the brink of death. If it wasn't for Little Ice, perhaps Wuxia's leader would have died. Wuxia didn't explain in detail. Sillin guessed that the confrontation between Wuxia and Fog had almost killed Wuxia. There must have been a lot of danger involved. Sillin didn't expect Wuxia to value this cyborg life form more than the members of his own organization. A human's lifespan is short. I hope that in the future, when I can't accompany it to eat ice cream anymore, I'll have a companion to talk to. Even if it's a companion to fight, it'll be fine. At least it won't be too lonely. After so many years in the entire League of Stars, I've only found this fat cat of yours. Compared to strange creatures like Huimao and Ice Cream, the lifespan of humans was really too short. Even people with A-level genes and above, who were known to have the longest natural lifespan among humans, couldn't be compared to these creatures. After all, they were also considered robots. No one knew how long their lifespan was. How old is this cat of yours? Wuxia asked. More than 200 years. It said so itself. What about Little Ice? I don't know. There are no humans where it lives. It's a planet with a sea-level habitability. There's no advanced civilization. It doesn't know how to calculate time, and it can't speak the language of the League of Stars. Apart from hunting, it hides in its cave all day long. It's obviously very powerful, but it's afraid to see the light. When I was dragged into its cave, I thought I was going to become a chipmunk's food. I didn't expect it to make me safer, because no animal on that planet dares to enter its cave. When Wuxia was talking about these things, his eyes were gentle, as if he was talking about his precious child. Outsiders probably wouldn't expect the dignified boss of Wuxia to have such a side to him. Compared to Huimao, Ice Cream was indeed low-key, like a mouse that couldn't see the light. But what about Huimao? Sillin remembered that when this guy was a weak kitten, he had swallowed a few wolves while lying there. Looking at this guy's usual style, he knew that this fatty had always been arrogant. Although Wuxia had said all this, Sillin didn't think that this uncle had come all the way here just to talk about Ice Cream. As expected, after Wuxia talked about Ice Cream a little more, he said, "When I was searching for cyborgs, I had also focused my attention on some of the secret research labs of the League of Stars. There are a lot of research labs in the League of Stars that research cyborgs, but the results were not satisfactory at all. They were all failures." "Did you send someone to the research base at Sector C to steal experimental information as well?" "That's right. One of the labs was researching the fusion of machine and organic life. I thought they would create something new since they were so secretive, but it's just trash." Wuxia's expression was calm, but his words were filled with mockery and disdain. "I've learned some inside stories while I was collecting information over the years. For example, the most influential company in the League of Stars, Miracle Corporation. I know who's supporting them, including the shady deals they've made in the dark. There was one time that group of people came to capture Lil Bing with Nabila. In a fit of anger, I carried out an assassination attempt." "Who are those people?" "The old fellows of the Yu family. However, if Azrael's men hadn't interfered, I would have succeeded. Oh, by the way, you and the little princess of the Yu family, Yu Linglong, are you? Did you know that Yu Linglong's legs were broken for a period of time? She was injured by us during that assassination attempt." Sillin frowned. He remembered that Yu Linglong had been in a wheelchair for a period of time. It was when Sector Z was opened, and Sillin had sensed the presence of Azrael's men at the time. Azrael's men and the Yu family had a deal. I don't know what the deal was, but they are definitely connected. This time, Navigator has a device that can seal off the starship's AI system. Right? That's the result of Azrael's research. There was too much information in Wuxia's words. Navigator's men had Azrael's help? Or was it the Yu family who was adding fuel to the fire? "There's one more thing I need to tell you. You must not know that the little princess of the Yu family once had designs on the cat beside you, right? You may have protected the cat well in the past, but some people still recognize the cat's uniqueness. However, when they decided to take action in the end, they still targeted me and Lil Bing, who had been staying with me all this time. Politicians are all born actors." Sillin had been silent all this time in response to Wuxia's words. The Yu family aside, Wuxia had known about Huimao since a long time ago, but he had only revealed himself now. It would appear that Wuxia had been observing Sillin and Huimao all this time. If Sillin and Huimao's performance was unreliable to Wuxia, then this conversation probably wouldn't have taken place. A long while later, Sillin asked, So let's work together. I won't interfere with your business, and you shouldn't interfere with Wuxia's business either. Private matters are private matters, and we'll work together when there's a need to work together. What do you think?" Azrael and Fog both have partners, so I think Wuxia is looking for a partner as well. Who are you going to work with, Vanguard or the 11th Squad? Sillin looked at Wuxia. The 11th Squad, of course. I don't get along with Vanguard. You know that. After some thought, Sillin extended his hand and smiled. It's a pleasure working with you. Pleasure working with you. Wuxia extended his hand and high-fived Sillin. They didn't sign any agreement. To them, a so-called agreement wasn't essential. If they wanted to betray each other, a mere agreement wouldn't be able to stop them. While Sillin and Wuxia were conversing, the two fellows who were originally competing with each other in a ball game were now hugging each other and fighting fiercely. They kicked, clawed, and even bit each other. The tables and chairs beside them were now in pieces. It wasn't clear if they were scratched or bitten. Hee, such a good relationship. Wuxia laughed. Sillin was speechless. Both of them had bitten off a few pieces of fur. Was this a sign of a good relationship? Which kid hasn't been through a fight? Wuxia didn't seem to mind. The one you have, it's a female? Sillin asked. I think so. I think so? And I think so? They've lived together for more than 10 years? You don't even know the gender of your own kid? Wuxia looked at the communicator in his hand and saw an encrypted message. The fight is almost over. It was a pleasant conversation. Wuxia called out to Lil Bing. Ice Cream, who was fighting with Huimao, kicked Huimao away and jumped back into Wuxia's arms. Meow, I'll beat you into a dried fish next time. Wheeze spat out the white fur in its mouth and pointed its paw at the direction of the sound with a threatening tone. Ice Cream, who was nestled in Wuxia's arms, snorted and started licking his fur. Both of them had bald spots all over their bodies, but the wounds quickly healed and new fur grew on them. For creatures like them, this level of injury was a piece of cake. Wuxia left the starship with Ice Cream. No one except Sillin, Huimao and Cheto knew that Ice Cream had been here. Not even Sigma and Moon knew about it. Huimao buried his head in a storage cabinet and counted his belongings. Meow, they didn't pay. Stinky rats, don't let me see them again or I'll beat them to death. Sillin shook his head and walked to the side to pick up the forgotten leather ball. He didn't want the cat to lose it. Just like Wuxia said, the battle was coming to an end very soon. Both sides had called for a ceasefire because it would only benefit the others if they kept fighting. The navigators had suffered more losses this time, so they were the first to retreat. Vanguard's people stayed behind to deal with the aftermath. Ji Feng was lying inside a healing pod on one of the A Squad starships. He was covered in multiple wounds, and his condition was fairly serious. The healing pod was connected to his body with all kinds of tubes. It was a scary sight. However, Ji Feng was still conscious. Beside the healing pod, Stanley and a few other high-ranking members of the A clan stood there and reported the situation to Ji Feng. Ji Feng listened with his eyes closed. When Stanley told him about the 11th Squad, he opened his eyes. Let Pango stay there if he wants to. I'm not that easy to kill. As for the 11th Squad, don't worry about them. Let Sillin think what he's doing. But don't you think the 11th Squad is too unstable, Commander? Someone asked. As long as we don't force him, Sillin won't harm Vanguard. He's a member of Vanguard after all. Moreover, the 11th Squad has something the other squads and even the 4 great hunter regiments don't have. They have extremely valuable technical talents there. The hunter regiments had never placed much importance on technical talents. Even Komunidin, who researched parasites and wrote the parasitic code, would not have made much of an impact without Nada's help. He might not even have been able to preserve the parasitic code. The technological development of the hunter regiments was limited. The 4 great hunter regiments didn't have much in the way of independent development. Most of them relied on trading and purchasing to acquire new technology. However, this wasn't the case for the 11th team. In this battle, the armor worn by the members of the 11th team, the fighter jets piloted by the members of the 11th team, and the members of the 11th team who were usually extremely low-key but had extraordinary abilities all left a deep impression on the A team. Ji Feng wasn't offended by Stanley's request for compensation. Instead, he smiled. That's Sillin's style. Give him as much as he wants. How do we treat the 11th Squad from now on? Stanley asked. We'll treat them the same way. We don't have to do anything on purpose. Besides, they don't care what others think of them. Sillin, I underestimated him. Ji Feng closed his eyes again. He admitted that he had underestimated Sillin. He wasn't the only one. Ji Feng believed that Azrael and the other organizations had underestimated Sillin as well. No one knew what Sillin was capable of, but a person like him had kept a low profile throughout the chaos of the League of Stars. What was Sillin trying to do? According to the information he had, Ji Feng had always been suspicious of Sillin's motives. He couldn't figure out what Sillin was thinking. Sillin only cared about a small number of people in Vanguard. He didn't care about the entire Vanguard. Ji Feng knew this, so he wasn't afraid of Sillin seizing power. However, he had a feeling that Sillin was someone with an ulterior motive. It was just that he couldn't figure out what the kid was trying to do. Captain, the bodies of the 3 killers from Fog have been sent over by the 11th squad, Stanley said. Ji Feng moved his fingers. I don't need to tell you how to deal with them. You guys do it. The 3 killers from Fog were to be used as a memorial to the dead members and the top executives who had been assassinated in this incident. Captain, is Sillin really that powerful? Someone next to Stanley asked. Ji Feng didn't answer. Instead, he asked Stanley to release a projection. On the screen was Lan Mei's corpse, including the long gash on her body that had almost split her body into 2 halves. From the wound on her body and the 3 hands that were cut off, she didn't even have time to react when she was hit. That is to say, Sillin's attack was extremely fast and ruthless enough to kill her in one strike. How fast was it that Lan Mei didn't even have time to react? The few people standing next to the healing pod unconsciously looked at Ji Feng. They wondered how he would fare compared to their captain. Have you figured out the cause of Roten's death? Ji Feng asked. Stanley shook his head. Not yet. The 11th squad doesn't reveal anything. Then forget it. Ji Feng waved his finger, indicating that there was no need to continue the research. Captain. A man came in. It was Suali, one of Ji Feng's subordinates. Ji Feng gestured for Stanley and the others to leave. After they left, Suali took out a secret message that he had just received. Lan Hudi? What's up with that guy? Shouldn't he be busy fighting with Heaven's Birth? Although puzzled, Gale still gave a series of passwords after Suali left. Then a projector at the side projected an image. The image was of Blue Butterfly's current leader, the person with the codename Blue Butterfly. How is it? Can you still live? The person in the video teased. Cut the crap. What's up? Yes, let's work together. Chapter 395. Ji Feng didn't seem surprised at Lan Hudi's suggestion to work together. You can't handle him on your side? Not really. Lan Hudi put his hands on the table, crossed his fingers and smiled. As long as I have enough time, I can finish them all, including Bloomer. Bloomer, Lan Hudi, Ji Feng, and Tamer of the Navigator were all star-ranked hunters. These 4 were known as the 4 giants in the world of hunters, because they were the leaders of the Hunter Corps. The 4 giants were the symbols of the entire League of Stars. The 4 giants had been in this situation for a long time, but now Lan Hudi actually said that as long as he had enough time, he could finish off Bloomer. It seems you have made a good plan, Ji Feng said. No emotion could be heard from his voice. That's because no one else is paying attention to me. But you are in trouble. The 3 most difficult powers to deal with in the League of Stars have all interfered in your battle against the Navigator. You are lucky that you can still speak, Lan Hudi said. The 3 most difficult powers that Lan Hudi mentioned were Azrael, Fog, and Wuxia. Anyone who got involved with one of them would have a headache, much less all 3 at the same time. But this time, what Lan Hudi didn't know was that Wuxia wasn't interfering for the Vanguard but for Sillin. It could be said that the Vanguard had received some help from Wuxia because of Sillin. Otherwise, the Vanguard would have lost a few more high-level members. Even if they were prepared, Azrael and Fog interfered at the same time, Ji Feng would be in trouble. If it was just the Navigator's people, Ji Feng wouldn't have ended up in such a terrible situation. Nabila personally intervened this time? Lan Hudi asked. Ji Feng didn't say anything. Nabila and Tamer attacked at the same time. Ji Feng was indeed in a terrible situation. If it wasn't for Wuxia stopping Nabila, the battle wouldn't have ended so quickly. Ji Feng did not answer, and Lan Huti did not care. His main purpose this time was not this. Let's cooperate, Lan Huti said. Reason. The League of Stars logo hunter group doesn't need 4. Ji Feng looked at Lan Huti. He did not expect Lan Huti to have such an idea. Which one should I cut? There was no need for 4 hunter groups in the League of Stars, but there definitely couldn't be only 2. That way there wouldn't be peace. In that case, only one of them could be cut off. Heaven's Birth. As for the reason, I thought you should know. Ji Feng knew exactly why Lan Huti had made such a choice. Heaven's Birth was merely working with a few scattered assassin organizations, and behind the navigators were the people from the 3 sectors of the League of Stars. The weapons and technology used by the navigators this time were not something they could get their hands on. Some of them were newly developed by the military. Although there were not many of them, Ji Feng knew that they were from the 3 sectors of the upper 3 sectors. Although the conflict between the navigators and the vanguard this time was huge, there was no guarantee that the weapons and troops in their hands would be even stronger next time. It was even possible that the navigators had changed internally. There were too many unfamiliar faces among the senior navigators who went to negotiate this time. Ji Feng already had a premonition. The navigators were no longer the navigators of the past. The hunters there were no longer pure hunters, but hounds. Those people want to attack the hunter group through the hunter group? Ji Feng lowered his eyelids, thought for a moment and snorted. All right, let's cut off Heaven's Birth first. While Ji Feng and Lan Huti were plotting to turn the Big 4 into the Big 3, Silan also had a secret communication device in the starship. Long time no see, Silan. On the communication screen, it was still that familiar face, that familiar girl with an innocent, cute, and playful smile. Long time no see, Ling Long. Silan was in his own lounge, not letting Huimao in. There were some things he didn't want others to know, including Huimao. If Huimao knew something, he would probably make a fuss again. How are you guys this time? Did the 11th squad suffer a lot of losses in the war? How are the members? From Yu Linglong's question, Silan could tell that she was very clear about the situation here. Not bad. There were some losses, but there were no casualties. That's good. Yu Linglong smiled sweetly on the screen. Wuxia talked to me. Yu Linglong's smile faded at Silan's words. Is that so? What did you find out? I found out a few things, like why you were in a wheelchair back then. Then he must have told you about how he almost captured your cat. Yu Linglong twirled her hair with her fingers. Do you believe him? I do. But I also believe that there's more to it than meets the eye. Yu Linglong retracted her smile and said seriously, It's true that I told my grandfather about the cat beside you, but I know that if he had to choose between you and Wuxia, he would definitely choose Wuxia. This is also the reason why I contacted you this time. Silan didn't say anything and signaled Yu Linglong to continue. Seeing that Silan wasn't impatient, Yu Linglong continued. You know that for families like ours, we usually choose a core member to nurture. In my generation, there are 3 candidates. In fact, there were originally 5, but the other 2 have been eliminated. Being eliminated meant either death or crippling. Among the 3 candidates now, 1 is me, and the other 2 are my eldest cousin brother and second cousin brother. The competition between the 3 of us has always been very intense. And after that incident, I knew that Nabila and my eldest cousin brother had cooperated. I knew that he would definitely choose to hide and not to lay his hands on you. Ein Unpardonable protected the cyborg very well. Because of this, Nabila wanted to use this to attack him even more, as Ein Unpardonable did not pay much attention to other things at all. Those who joined Wuxia for a short period of time, such as Judy, and those who joined for a long time but didn't get Wuxia's full trust, didn't know the secret of that cyborg. They didn't know that Wuxia had a cyborg that was known as a miracle creature by his side. They just thought that it was a precious pet that could talk and had a high IQ. Later, Wuxia took revenge on the Yu family because of this matter. My father and second cousin brother almost lost their lives. I lost both of my legs and had to recuperate for a long time. This was the result of the intervention of Azrael. And Nabila didn't help at all. Nia Bella wanted to use Wuxia to kill us, causing the Yu family and Wuxia to become enemies. However, his plan didn't succeed, and after that incident, my eldest cousin lost the support of a portion of the family. Even my grandfather had a bad opinion of my eldest cousin. Later, Wuxia said that no one is allowed to have any ideas about the cyborg in his possession, and no one is allowed to have any ideas about the cat in your possession. After that, my eldest brother wanted to attack your cat again. Back then, I wanted to notify you, but I couldn't contact you at all. It was as if you had disappeared. At the time, Silen had taken Huimao to the Mist Bodhisattva Empire and avoided a crisis. By the time he returned, the League of Stars was in chaos, and everyone was too busy to pay attention to Silen. Silen guessed that the reason he and Huimao were able to go so smoothly was because Wuxia had secretly helped him fend off a lot of dangers. Silen was very grateful for this. Whether or not Wuxia did it for Little Ice Cream and Wheeze, it was still a favor. As for the matter with Instructor Mo Hung, I apologize. I had no choice. If I didn't act, my second cousin brother would have, and if he did, Instructor Mo Hung would have suffered a lot. Silen fell silent for a moment before asking, "What are you doing this time?" On the screen, Yu Linglong stared at Silen for a while. She still couldn't understand Silen. It was the same back then, and it was the same now. Sighing, Yu Linglong said, "Right now my strongest competitor in the Yu family is my second cousin brother. This time, he sent someone to assassinate someone, and my people can't protect him in time. Therefore, I hope that you can help me find that person and protect him until reinforcements arrive. This man may have stepped down from his position, but his influence still remains. If I can get his help, the support I will receive at Sector A will be much greater." When she said this, Yu Linglong's aura changed completely. She was no longer the mischievous and lively girl she used to be. Right now, Yu Linglong exuded a sense of competence and coldness. This was the real little princess of the Yu family, and perhaps the empress who would control the entire Yu family in the future. Silen looked at Yu Linglong in this state. He felt a little unfamiliar, but he wasn't surprised. Besides, the fact that Yu Linglong could say all this meant that she trusted him enough. "Who is it?" Silen asked. "Former Senator Sambert." Yu Linglong told Silen about Sambert's information. This was equivalent to a trade between an employer and a hunter. Their friendship was nothing more than a weight of trust. "All right, I'll contact you when the time comes. Don't worry, the number of people who know about this is limited. There won't be more than 3 in our team." Silen read the information once and deleted it in front of Yu Linglong. "Silen, thank you," Yu Linglong said after a moment of silence. "No need, you've helped me a lot in the past." "Silen, do you know? When I first saw you at 7 Luminaries, I had a feeling that if I had this person by my side to help me, it was only a matter of time before I took control of the Yu family, or even the entire League of Stars. I'm sorry, I just want to be a hunter," Silen said with a smile. "That's true. You, Silen, don't like to be restricted." Yu Linglong also smiled and softened the cold expression on her face. "Be careful. The Yu family assassins may not be as strong as Mist or Wuxia, but they're definitely not weak." Silen made a got it gesture and ended the call. The lounge was quiet. Silen lay on the chair and thought back to what Yu Linglong had said. Silen believed Yu Linglong's explanation. Back then, Yu Linglong and others had helped him a lot, such as Wuxia who helped him in secret, and Gaydar who had never shown up again. Silen knew why Wuxia helped him, but why Gaydar? Rubbing his forehead, Silen decided not to think too much about it. He was going with his intuition. Silen knew of the Sambo Yu Linglong spoke of. He had met him once before. Sambert was the old man Hua she wanted to protect at Sector M back then. That old man was an important person. If even Yu Linglong paid so much attention to him, it was obvious that the old man's influence wasn't low. When he thought about the star map coordinates Yu Linglong gave him, Silen smiled. What a coincidence. Sambert's spaceplane was attacked by Yu Linglong's second cousin brother's men. In order to avoid being intercepted, they fled to Sector X, Planet X, C362, Silen's birthplace, Planet Brown Earth. It was time to go back and take a look. Silen got up and walked out of the lounge. The first thing he saw was Huimao running towards him with cat-like steps. The guy looked to be in a pretty good mood. You're finally out, Sillin. Huimao shouted from afar. Then he jumped onto Sillin's shoulder and said, the A Squadron has allocated funds. Only more, no less. Sillin had also guessed that it would be like this. There really were only a few things that could make this cat happy. So, Sillin wrenched the gray cat off his shoulder. There were still some food crumbs stuck to its claws. It probably hadn't even had the time to lick them when it heard that the A Squadron was going to allocate funds for its repairs. It was so happy that it forgot everything and ran straight over. Also, most of the repairs on the starship are done, and we've got an extra sum of money. What do you think we should buy? The gray cat walked in front of Sillin and raised its tail. The tip of its tail was even curled into an arc as it muttered to itself. Sillin didn't interrupt it. He let it ramble on for a while, or it wouldn't be able to hold itself back. When he arrived at the command room, Sillin called Cheto over and told him about the new operation. Just like before, Sillin only planned to bring Cheto and Wheeze with him when he went to find Sambot. Everyone else should stay in the team for now. It was only after Huimao was done nagging that it noticed Sillin and Cheto were discussing something else. Another mission? Huimao pulled its ears to the sides in obvious displeasure. It was going to sleep for a while, and since there was a mission, it meant that it couldn't sleep anymore. However, where are we going this time? Huimao asked. If they were going to a free trade zone, it could buy some high-grade cat food and try it as a pastime. In the end, to Huimao's disappointment, Sillin was going to the poor Sector X in Huimao's eyes. Sector X, Huimao and Sillin had been there before, and there really wasn't much fun there. Moreover, after the League of Stars' chaos, the tourist planets were in a half-closed state, and many of the supply chains were broken. They would definitely be bored to death if they went there. Although we're only going to Sector X this time, the mission isn't simple, Sillin said. Huimao's ears moved, but he didn't say anything. We'll probably run into a lot of killers, Sillin said again. Huimao's ears perked up. It's not going to be easy, Sillin concluded. Huimao scratched its ears with its paw. In other words, the reward is a lot? That's right. Then let's go. When do we depart? We shook its fur. It was in high spirits, you know. At the side, Cheto. This cat deserved to be tricked by Sillin back then. Chapter 396. Sillin didn't stay for the post-battle meeting. Ji-Feng was busy with his healing, so he couldn't attend to the post-battle meeting for now. Therefore, Sillin left with Cheto and Huimao after informing Stanley that he was going to leave. Stanley didn't bother with Sillin either. Ji-Feng had said that Sillin could do whatever he wanted, so there was no need for him to interfere. Moreover, Stanley was actually very wary of Sillin after this incident. Now that Sillin was gone, he didn't have to face him anymore. He let out a sigh of relief. Yudi took Sillin's place to participate in the post-battle summary meeting. Right now, the 11th squad was under Yudi's command. Shikai and Shimu were busy upgrading their robots. Last time, they were halfway through the upgrade, but they hadn't finished yet. This time they received some new data and information. Both Shikai and Shimu were busy upgrading their robots. Their data and information were all derived from actual combat. The data they obtained from this battle was very meaningful, and it was a good opportunity for them to upgrade their robots once more. After the meeting, Yudi and the rest of the 11th squad returned to the base to rest and reorganize. Their armor needed some repairs, and Carrie's group needed time to get used to each other. Not only did they need to repair the hardware, but they also needed a heart-to-heart talk with each other. Everyone was tired after the battle, so it was time for a good rest. Hey, don't you think our captain needs to rest? Xiao Shang leaned on the railing and said lazily to Carrie, who was busy repairing the fighter in the workshop below. How would I know? Our captain is a busy man, but we don't need to worry about that. We just need to improve ourselves. Carrie knew very well why Sillin had only brought Cheto and Wheeze with him. One reason was because of the secrecy of their mission, and the other reason was because of the level of danger. Although they were above average compared to other hunters, they were nothing compared to Sillin and Cheto. He circled around the starship once before sitting down at a corner. No one knew what he was thinking. Hey, why are you daydreaming again? Behind him, Zoel and Sigma flew over as well. The four of them had been working together all this time. The light on Ayu's face flickered, and he said in a deep voice, "I'm thinking about life." "Alright, keep thinking, but don't overdo it. The starship system is still in the process of upgrading. Be careful not to ruin Little 11. You know, when we think too seriously, it will affect the surrounding machinery," Rufia said, his tone clearly rising. Zoel said coldly, "Don't say that with a smug tone. There's nothing to be proud of." Rufia, who was feeling pleased with himself, was choked by Zol's cold water. While the 11th squad was busy with their own business, Silin, Cheto, and Huimao were secretly traveling to Sector X. Sector X hadn't changed much. If anything, it would be that the sector had returned to its former bleak state. There was a time when the tourism planets in Sector X were mined, and it had boosted the population and economy of the sector. Many people's lives had changed because of the tourism planets. Their labor force was cheap, but at least they finally found a way to sell it cheaply. Unlike the beginning when they couldn't even sell their cheap labor force. When Silin brought Huimao and Tang Qiuqiu here, Sector X was at its busiest in the last few decades. However, the liveliness didn't last long before the League of Stars' war began. After the Fenier's family's little garden and other tourism planets were half closed, Sector X returned to its former bleak state. Of course, this bleak state was only relative to a trade sector. The people living in Saturn sector were used to this bleak state since a long time ago. To them, it wasn't much of a change. Silin looked at the coded message he just received on his communicator, and had Cheto drive the spaceplane into the planet. Silin was all too familiar with planet Brown Earth. He didn't even need to look at the satellite map to know which places were suitable for landing. The satellite array outside the planet was still the same as before. However, Silin was no longer afraid of these sky eyes that the people on the planet feared. He didn't need to do anything himself. Be it Huimao or Cheto, they could easily take care of these sky eyes and avoid their surveillance. Compared to some of the more complicated surveillance equipment he had experienced before, Planet Brown Earth's sky eyes looked too ordinary. After avoiding all kinds of surveillance, their small spaceplane landed in a remote and barren area. There was a forest here, and the growth of the trees wasn't good. Due to the environment, it was impossible for them to grow densely. However, for Silin, this didn't affect their spaceplane's landing and concealment. After leaving the spaceplane, it turned invisible on its own. Very few people came to this area, and even if they did, they might not be able to discover the spaceplane parked here. "Where are we going first?" Crouching on Silin's shoulder, Huimao moved his claws. He was getting bored again, and his claws were itchy if he didn't find something to do. Silin looked at his communicator. Right now, Yulinglong only knew that Sambot was on this planet, but she didn't know his specific location. Unless Sambot contacted Silin of his own accord, or Silin found Sambot directly. The strange thing was that if Sambot's situation was really bad, he should have accepted Yulinglong's good intentions and contacted Silin. But he didn't, which meant that Sambot's situation wasn't too bad. Moreover, Sambot was guarded against Yulinglong, so he had no intention of accepting Yulinglong's good intentions for now. It seemed that Sambot really was very dissatisfied and distrustful of the Yu family. "Never mind, let's wait for a while." Silin looked around and said, "I'm going back to take a look." "Ah, you mean that run-down town?" Huimao had a pretty deep impression of that place. He felt that Silin's birthplace wasn't as good as his. "Yes, that's the place." Huimao's ears drooped. Although he didn't say anything, his reaction alone was enough to tell how unwilling he was. He was only enduring it for Silin's sake. Silin smiled and patted Huimao's head. "There might be some changes this time." "What changes?" "I don't even have a place to live," muttered Huimao. "Have you forgotten? When I came here a few years ago, I bought an abandoned housing area and had people renovate it." Huimao's ears perked up the moment Silin mentioned this. He remembered that the secret purchase was made with his help and tampered with some system data. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been so easy to take down the area without Silin's help. Huimao snorted twice when he thought of that. "Then let's go. It's free to live in my own place anyway." "Cheto. Is he implying that I'm going to buy cat food with the money I'm saving?" Actually, Huimao wasn't just trying to save money. He knew that there was a territory that belonged to him that he hadn't marked or patrolled yet. Other than the prosperous city and civilian district, there was also a desolate area bordered by the peaceful civilian district. Sillin and the others had landed in this desolate area. They walked straight ahead, and it didn't take long before they saw the poor houses at the edge. No one noticed that Sillin and the others were a lot less populated than before. Some of the houses had collapsed, and it looked like no one had lived in them for a long time. However, in the direction of the city, there were some newly built houses. Some of the people who sold their labor at a low price had saved enough money to build a new house here. This place was close to the city, which gave them a sense of superiority. They felt that they were superior compared to the people in the center of the civilian area. The abandoned houses Sillin bought were located at the center of the civilian district. According to Sillin's design, the builders had built the place very well. After demolishing the abandoned houses, they built a big courtyard that looked similar to the one in the wilderness. The only difference was that this courtyard wasn't decorated with any fancy decorations, and the colors were a little dull. The two-story building in the courtyard wasn't very eye-catching even on a satellite map. All of this was done with Sillin's own money. He didn't use the 11th Squad's funds or Huimao's cat food money. Sillin had earned all of it by hunting and completing missions himself. Moreover, the cost of living here wasn't high to begin with. And this was the civilian district. It didn't cost much to build the place. The population here was even smaller than before. Most of the people who participated in the development of the tourist planet had migrated, and some of them had disappeared without a trace. No one knew if they were still alive or not. The rest of them squeezed into the city as much as they could, and those who couldn't fit into the city set up camp near the city. Compared to what he saw the last time he came here, there were many more abandoned houses. Huimao had already jumped into the courtyard when Sillin walked over. The protective walls of the courtyard were nothing to Huimao, and he didn't even need a key card to enter. Even though Huimao didn't like the conditions here, it was still his territory. After rubbing his scent and making some markings, Huimao jumped back onto Sillin's shoulder and pointed at the abandoned houses around them. Sillin, let's buy all of these too. Let's build a bigger courtyard. I'm going to buy all of these. Sillin didn't enter the courtyard to take a closer look. Instead, he walked in another direction. There was a small shop there. It was the tavern that Sillin rented out. The tavern's business wasn't good. One could tell from the counter that very few people came here. Laughter came from inside the tavern. It came from both adults and children. When Sillin walked into the tavern, the welcome screen at the entrance didn't light up. It had been stopped, and there was no need to waste electricity when it was so popular. Welcome, what can I do for you? A middle-aged man with green stubble walked out of the tavern. His face looked a little weathered, but he was in good spirits. There was a smile in his eyes, but when he saw Sillin, he froze for a moment and forgot what he was going to say. Long time no see, 20%. Sillin greeted him with a smile before sitting down next to a round wooden table. Cheto sat down at another table and didn't disturb Sillin and 20%'s conversation. Huimao was about to jump onto the counter and walk around when Cheto pulled him away. Sillin had rented out this tavern to 20% the first time he left. The last time he came here, the tavern's business wasn't this bad, and 20%'s life wasn't bad either. But obviously, it wasn't the same anymore. The counter was very clean, and it was obvious that the owner cleaned it every day. The wine bottles were also very clean, but some unnoticed dust at the corner exposed the truth. It's pretty hard right now, isn't it? Sillin said. Sillin, is it really you? 20% finally came to himself, and found it a little hard to believe. After all, it had been years since Sillin left. Although he rented out the tavern, Sillin had never asked about the tavern's situation, be it when it was profitable or when it was in dire straits these past 2 years. After Sillin nodded in confirmation, 20% chuckled. You don't look like you've changed much. 20% wasn't much older than Sillin, but now that the two of them were standing side by side, people would believe them if they said they were father and son. The difference in lifespan caused by the environment they grew up in, and their genetic rank made up for this difference. Silin chatted with 20% about the changes that had happened here in the past few years. Now 20% was married and had a child, living the same life as his parents. 20%'s wife came out to entertain Silin and the rest. She was a typical woman from the commoner district, but it was obvious that she treated 20% very well, and her smile was very sincere. Her son held a rag in his hand and ran behind his mother with his short legs. "Do you want to go live in the city?" Silin asked. "No, I'm not suitable." 20%, who already had a lot of deep wrinkles, scratched his head in embarrassment. "I still think I'm more suitable here. I'm not used to living in the city. Come Kong, call Uncle Silin." 20% carried his son over. Silin and 20% were of the same generation, so the child naturally should call Silin uncle. "Hello, Uncle Silin." The child looked at Silin and greeted. Actually, he felt that he should call Silin big brother. The person in front of him looked so much younger than his father. However, he was more curious about the fat cat that was yawning on the table next to him. His eyes darted over. "So fat." "Hello, Kong. This is for you." Silin took out the things that he had prepared from his bag. It was some snacks that he bought when he was buying cat food. Sometimes Huimao would use these to grind his teeth. "Silin, this." 20% was embarrassed. Although he had never seen it before, he could tell that these things were very expensive. Moreover, they were all food that could not be bought in the surrounding area. The food did not attract much jealousy. The security in this area was not that good either. "It's okay. These are gifts for the little guy." Silin pushed the things on the table towards Kong and rubbed his head. "Thank you, Uncle Silin." Kong no longer paid attention to Huimao. After 20% agreed, the little guy sat obediently at the side with a pile of food. Huimao glared at the child who opened the packaging and started munching on the food. "That's what I use to grind my teeth when I'm bored." Seeing the fat cat on the table next to him waiting for him with its round eyes, Kong picked up a biscuit and handed it over. "Here, kitty." Huimao turned his head away. "Not eating. I'm angry." "Don't worry about it, Kong. Eat it yourself. It has its own cat food," said Silin. 20%'s wife brought over a box of wine and a plate of snacks. She placed them on the table where Silin and 20% were sitting. "Thank you, sister-in-law." Silin took a bottle of wine. It was the taste of the old town. It was cheap, but it had enough flavor. It reminded Silin of the days when he worked here. Cheto did not refuse the wine in front of him. Instead, he picked it up and took 2 sips. Huimao's eyes widened even more. Why is a robot drinking wine? It didn't take long for Huimao to notice some barely noticeable water vapor rising from Cheto's body. "Oh, sister-in-law, do you have tissues?" asked Silin. "Yes, please wait a moment." 20%'s wife smiled apologetically. Then she walked to the back room and passed some tissues to Silin. "Enjoy your meal. I'll go prepare some side dishes." 20%'s wife left after saying that. She called Kong along so that he wouldn't interrupt their conversation. She knew that Silin was the owner of this tavern, and that Silin was the one who gave 20% a better foothold. But was he here to take back the tavern? After Second Cheng's wife and little Kong had left, Silin gulped down a mouthful of wine and said to Second Cheng, "You and little Kong can increase your gene rank through genetic transformation. This way, your lifespan will naturally be a little longer. You have the highest success rate. Kong is slightly worse, but his success rate is still around 70 to 80%. 20% put down the bottle and asked, "Where's the kid's mother?" "She's a little special. I'm afraid her success rate is only 10% at most." Silin had already analyzed Kang's DNA when he was rubbing his son's head. When he took the tissue, Silin touched 20%'s wife's finger and analyzed her DNA as well. There were some things that even the most advanced medical technology couldn't change. Jinya once said that it was called fate. Then forget it. 20% smiled. "Thank you, Silin." 20% knew that Silin thinks that Silin is helping him, but he didn't force the issue. Silin took out a bottle and a box of liquid medicine. "This is for 5 people. You can try it if you change your mind." What Silin took out was a potion he had synthesized himself. It was milder and had fewer side effects. It was suitable for people with low geno ranks. No one in a hunter regiment would use this potion because their average Geno rank was above B rank. 20%'s hands trembled as he looked at the bottle and medicine on the table. This was something they didn't even dare to think about. Sillin took out another card. The rent from 20%'s deal had always been on this carry card. I'll leave this pub to you, Sillin said. I've already done the paperwork. Actually, the paperwork was done directly by hacking into the system. It only saved the manual verification process. No one would be able to find out, and no one would. Old David took the opportunity to emigrate. No one knew where he went. On this planet, 20% was the only person that Sillin knew. After leaving the pub, Sillin went to Jenya's former residence. The lush and leafy Fuji tree in the courtyard looked a little sickly right now. The last time Sillin came over, it hadn't grown much, and now it looked even sicker than before. Sure enough, without the people from the Gen family, the Fuji tree couldn't grow? Sillin touched the cracked bark on the Fuji tree and said, "Hold on a little longer. I'll take you to the Gen family." Sillin was standing quietly in the yard and reminiscing. Squatting on the broken, almost rotten wooden rocking chair under the Fuji tree, Huemao's eyes narrowed. Suddenly, his ears twitched, and he looked toward a certain direction in the yard. At the same time, Sillin and Cheto also looked in that direction. In the next moment, a figure nimbly jumped over the wall, avoided the protective equipment on the wall, and landed steadily on the ground. It was a very arrogant landing posture. Then, the bearded man who was dressed like a normal civilian in this area was stunned when he looked up. It was obvious from his expression that he didn't notice that there was someone in the yard, and there wasn't just one. Even the fat cat sitting on the rotten wood was looking at him. His face twitched as he landed in an arrogant posture. However, the sense of vigilance he had when he found out that there was someone in the yard was greatly reduced when he saw the person in the yard and the fat cat who was looking at him as if it had seen something fun. Cough hee hee, I've entered the wrong yard. Goodbye. A rough male voice rang before he turned around and prepared to slip away. Where are you going, Huzi? Sillin's leisurely voice rang. The man who was about to jump over the wall almost twisted his waist. He turned around and looked at Sillin helplessly. You can recognize me like this? Huimao yawned again, narrowed his eyes and continued to sleep. He wasn't an enemy, so he couldn't fight. Boring. What are you doing here? Sector X and Sector S are pretty far from each other. Sillin said. The bearded man in front of him who looked like the most common civilian in the ghetto was the disciple of the current leader of Fire Phoenix, one of the three great forces of Sector S, Pianhua. You're always dressed like a man every time I run into you. Do you have transvestism? Sillin said. Nonsense, this is called concealment, do you know? Pianhua did not elaborate. Sillin had a feeling that there should be more to this than meets the eye. However, Pianhua was unwilling to talk about it, so Sillin did not pursue the matter any further. He said, What are you doing here? Climbing over the wall? What about trespassing? Pianhua stopped pretending now and walked over with a swing of his arms. Nothing, I just saw that no one has been living here for a long time, so I was curious. Huemao's nose twitched. Don't you have a place to stay? You need to pay to stay here, and there are so many of you. Everyone has to pay their own rent. Pianhua's eyes flashed, and then he chuckled. No, it's just me. But Sillin, what are you guys doing here? This is my birthplace. This yard belongs to my master, Sillin said. Ah, so that's how it is, You were born here. Pianhua was flabbergasted. Although he did not know much about Sillin, he knew that Sillin was a powerful person. He could not imagine that Sillin was born in such a small and broken place, and in the slums at that. So, you're just here to reminisce? Pianhua asked. Sillin looked at Pianhua. What do you want to say? Nothing. Pianhua was a little hesitant. Sang bote, Sillin said softly. Hearing Sillin's words, Pianhua suddenly raised his head. Seeing the expression in Sillin's eyes, Pianhua did not plan to hide it anymore. Yes, I've been in contact with Sang Bote. Sillin was originally just probing, but when Pianhua suddenly raised his head, he knew the information in one glance. So when Sillin confirmed his guess, Pianhua also knew that he could not hide it anymore. You're really cunning. Pianhua sat next to the pile of rotten wood and flicked the cat on Huemao's ear with his finger. Huemao's flicking caused his finger to pop loudly. How did you come to be with Sangbote? Silin asked. I met him along the way, so I gave him a hand along the way. Also, Sangbo's popularity among the people is pretty high. Back when the prison was still around, I heard some people talk about him in prison. After I came out, I also learned some things, especially the people of Sector M. They all respect Sangbote a lot. I also received a mission to protect Sangbote until he is handed over to the people who will receive him. However, Sangbote has not contacted me of his own accord, and I cannot find his specific location for now. Oh, I didn't think that the person Sangbote was talking about was you. But if it is you, I can help persuade him. After all, Sangbo's safety can be somewhat guaranteed with you around. The pursuers will soon find Sangbote's location. They have a special tracker. Pianhua stood up and casually patted the dust on his pants. How is it? All right, I will wait at this location. If Sangbote is willing to accept my help, you can take him there. Silin gave the address of the newly built yard to Pianhua. I didn't expect you to have a place to live. I don't want anyone else to come to this yard. Silin looked at the yard. All right, I apologize for jumping in without permission. Remembering the address, Pianhua turned around, took a few steps and floated out. He looked very familiar with the process. I will go reinforce the surrounding protective wall system, Cheto said. Silin nodded, and then looked at the Fuji tree that did not have many leaves and frowned. Huimao stretched his back and rubbed his claws out of habit. As a result, he scratched the already broken rotten wooden chair even more. What are you thinking about again, Silin? Huimao jumped onto Silin's shoulder and asked while secretly rubbing the rotten wood shavings on his claws on Silin's clothes. He also rubbed a small mushroom between his toes on Silin's collar. While the gray cat was grinning, Silin, who was staring at the Fuji tree leaves, raised a hand and pinched the hair at the back of the gray cat's neck. His other hand patted little mushroom on his shoulder and the back of his collar. I know you're up to no good the moment you hooked your tail. All right, I've modified the yard's protective system. There are too many loopholes, so it took a lot of time, Cheto said after walking out of the yard. If anyone else heard this, it would be strange if they didn't vomit blood in anger. It took less than 2 minutes, and you call it took a lot of time? If it were anyone else, it would probably take half a day. Looking at the almost bald and withered Fuji tree again, Silin grabbed Huimao, turned around and walked towards the door. Let's go over there. Silin waited in the new courtyard all the way until night time. Pianhua finally brought Sangbote over quietly. There were also 5 people following Sangbote over. They were Sangbote's bodyguards. One of the bodyguards was heavily injured, and the other 2 were lightly injured. Those who weren't injured also looked tired, including Sambert. Only Pianhua looked very energetic. Silin, I know you. You saved me once, Sambot said to Silin. If he didn't know that the person who came was Silin, Sambot wouldn't have agreed so quickly. As for the reason he came at night, it was to avoid some eyes and ears. I am also very happy to see you again, Silin said. Chapter 397. I didn't expect you Linglong to find you. Sambot sighed. Silin smiled. But then Silin found that there was something wrong with Sambot's right hand hidden in his slender sleeve. Sensing Silin's gaze, Sambot raised his right arm and pulled up his sleeve, revealing his right arm that had been cut off. The wound had been treated, but it was only a rough treatment. It must have been quite painful. I was betrayed. They implanted a signal transmitter in my right hand, Sambot said. Sambot had been chased for some time. He also wondered why those people could always find him, even though he was hiding so well. After checking several times, he didn't find anything special. Later, when he was in danger, he met Pianhua. Pianhua said the reason. Sambot's right hand was implanted with a special signal transmitter. Sambot liked the wristband communicator. Once his wristband communicator broke, so he used a new one. He wore the communicator on his right hand, and since then, he had never taken it off. After Pianhua said the reason, Sambot knew that his communicator had been tampered with. Knowing the reason, Sambot wanted to take off the communicator, but found that it was useless. The transmitter had already seeped into his right hand. Therefore, Sambot decisively cut off his right hand and destroyed the communicator. One of the reasons why he didn't take the initiative to contact Sillin, and Sillin couldn't contact Sambot, was because the communicator was destroyed. However, Sambot didn't use the bodyguard's communicator. He had to be cautious now. Pianhua wasn't sure if there was only one signal transmitter. Maybe there were other more hidden signal transmitters to let the pursuers know Sambot's specific location. Therefore, they didn't dare to stay in a place that was easily exposed. When Pianhua was looking for a hiding place, he took a fancy to the courtyard in the wilderness. He also observed that there seemed to be no one living there, so he wanted to take the courtyard and use it as a temporary hiding place. After taking the courtyard, Pianhua could use the courtyard's protective network to set up some simple shielding facilities. However, he didn't expect to bump into Sillin and the others as soon as he jumped in. "Don't you need to treat your injury?" Sillin asked. "No, let's stay like this for now. We'll talk about it when it's safe in the future. We might not even be able to return safely." Sambert waved his hand and was supported by the bodyguards into a room arranged by Sillin for them to rest. They were really tired, but no matter how tired they were, the bodyguards had to take turns to guard them. For Sambert's hand injury, Sillin didn't take out those medicines. Sambot was now very guarded against people. Perhaps he wasn't like this in the past, but after knowing that he was betrayed by someone he trusted, his guard became even stronger. If Sambert could be trusted a little more, the wound on his hand wouldn't have been treated so roughly. Sillin didn't believe that Pixahuo hadn't taken out healing equipment, so it must have been Sambert who refused. They didn't even trust Pianhua who had saved them, so they definitely wouldn't trust Sillin who was entrusted by Yu Linglong to protect Sangbai. "Aren't you going to rest?" Sillin asked Pianhua, who was playing with Huimao with a piece of dried grass. "I'm not tired yet. I'll rest later." Pianhua plucked the dried grass from Huimao's paws and swept Huimao's nose. He seemed to be in good spirits. "All right. Sillin, does the 11th squad accept outsiders?" Pianhua turned to Sillin. "You want to join?" "Yes. I'm quite envious of you hunters. You can go on adventures everywhere." Pianhua looked at the short piece of dried grass in his hand that was bitten by the gray cat. He threw it away and sat upright. "I'm serious. If you can accept outsiders, I want to join you as an outsider." "Nope, the 11th squad doesn't accept outsiders." Wheeze interrupted Sillin before he could answer. It was as if Wheeze was the decision maker. Pianhua looked at Sillin again and saw that he was thinking the same thing. After a moment of thought, he asked, "What if I join the 11th squad?" That way, he wouldn't be considered an outsider anymore. Sillin fell silent. Pianhua was backed by one of the three great forces of Sector S, Fire Phoenix. If Pianhua joined the 11th squad, will your master agree? Sillin didn't believe that Fire Phoenix would be so easy to talk to. "Of course. My master has never objected to my decisions," Pianhua said confidently. Sillin's curiosity was piqued. He had learned some information about Pianhua from Tsijiu, and he knew that the current leader of Fire Phoenix valued Pianhua greatly. Pianhua's status in Fire Phoenix was very high, but the current Fire Phoenix didn't restrict him at all. When the prison was still around, Pianhua often visited the prison, and when the prison was no longer around, Pianhua left Sector to roam freely. Moreover, the current Fire Phoenix didn't even assign a bodyguard to Pianhua. It was a little illogical. Regardless of whether Sector S was a special place or not, the other two forces besides Fire Phoenix, Golden Beginnings and Genia, protected Zhen Xingfu and the others very well. And Flying Snake's Tsijiu also had a few protectors around him. It just so happened that Pianhua, whom the current Fire Phoenix valued quite a bit, was an exception. Tsijiu was puzzled when he mentioned Pianhua. There was no doubt that Pianhua's status in Fire Phoenix was undeniable, but this person was just too weird. Could it be that Pianhua had disguised himself every time to avoid being recognized? If it was just a disguise, then the current Fire Phoenix shouldn't have allowed Pianhua to run around freely. Seeing that Sillin didn't answer immediately, Pianhua turned around and looked at Huimao, who was licking his paws. he said seriously. I can pay the admission fee. This amount. Pianhua said and gestured with his fingers. Huimao's eyes lit up in an instant, and he immediately looked at Silen. His meaning was for Silen to think about it carefully. Silen was speechless. Had this cat's weakness been exposed so quickly? All right, I'll give you time to think about it. I'm not in a hurry. You can give me an answer after this incident is over. Pianhua dusted his hands and stood up to stretch his arms. He didn't return to his room to rest, but instead sat on a stone bench in the courtyard and stared at the sky. This courtyard was already shielded from satellite surveillance, so even if there was an explosion in this courtyard, the sky wouldn't react. Hey Silen, where has your 11th squad been? Recommend me some special places. If I can't join a hunter regiment, I want to go check them out myself, Pianhua said. Special places? Silen thinks for a moment, and then named a few places that hunters frequented, including their former hunting grounds. That's great, Pianhua said. Silen didn't know if Pianhua was referring to the hunter profession, or those places. Huimao's ears twitched as he listened to the conversation lazily. Silen didn't need Huimao's reminder to notice that someone was coming his way. He had installed some sensors within 500 meters of the courtyard, and someone had triggered them. The sensors didn't detect people, but metals. This way, the chances of being discovered would be reduced. The people in this area wouldn't carry precious metals with them. Weapons made from such metals were extremely expensive, and the people of the civilian district couldn't afford them at all. Moreover, the fact that someone was able to move so quickly while carrying such metals meant that they were no ordinary person. Cheto immediately notified Sambot while he was next door. As expected, the signal transmitter wasn't the only thing they relied on to track someone. A moth-like insect flew into the courtyard, and Silen stared at it for a moment. It looked very similar to a normal moth at first glance, but a closer look would reveal that there was a huge difference between the two. This wasn't a moth. There weren't many moths in this area, and they were considered a rare species. The most common species in this area were flies. Smell. The smell of blood on Sambit's injured right hand, and Sambit's own scent. These people were using these special moths to sense smell to track Sambot. They had made a few preparations. At first, they must have relied on the signal transmitter to track Sambot, but they also considered the possibility that the transmitter might be discovered and destroyed. Therefore, they used this kind of moth. Huimao jumped up and swallowed the moth that flew into the courtyard. He opened his mouth and swallowed it. Disgusting, Huimao commented. Why are you eating it even though it's disgusting? Pianhua curled his lips at the side. Pianhua and Silen retreated to the small building. Cheto and Sambit's two bodyguards stood guard on the other side of the building. Almost silent bullets shot toward Silen and Pianhua, but they were all blocked by a transparent shield in front of them. This was Pianhua's setup. Poochie, an arrow of blood sprayed into the air from outside the wall. Then there was the sound of a human body falling to the ground. This was Huimao's handiwork. Squatting next to the stone bench and being ignored, Huimao took advantage of the moment when the people were shooting at Silen and Pianhua. His claw almost broke the person's neck, and this was the result of Huimao holding back. It had been holding back for a long time, and it had been waiting for this moment for a long time. After discovering that their companions had been hit for some reason, the people immediately became vigilant of their surroundings. But in the next moment, 3 of them were shot in the head almost at the same time. Who fired the shot? This was the question on the remaining people's minds. The only person who pulled out a gun at the small building was Silen, but they clearly saw that Silen's gun wasn't pointed in their direction. Why were they shot? And 3 people were shot at the same time. This was just the beginning. 5 more people were shot in succession. They were still wondering before they died. They clearly avoided the muzzle, and they clearly weren't in the direction the muzzle was pointing at, so why were they shot? After finishing off these people, Silen turned around and Pianhua also finished off 2 people. There was a hidden weapon on her arm. Normally, it looked like a normal arm guard, but it was a killing weapon right now. The hidden weapon shot out was very fast, and it had a certain degree of tracking function. After the hidden weapon hit the person, it exploded inside the person's body. Although it was a small explosion, the critical point was that the internal organs exploded and killed them very quickly. A product of Fire Phoenix's technology? Sillin was puzzled. I remember you have a whip, Sillin said. Pianhua didn't answer. She hadn't recovered from her nervous state just now. She looked around vigilantly. There are 13 people here, but there are only 11 corpses. She suspected that there were 2 more people hiding around. There's no need to look, they're all dead. The moment Sillin finished speaking, the gray cat jumped over from the other side of the courtyard wall and curled its lips. It complained as it walked over, disgusting. Pianhua. On the other side of the building, Cheto had finished off 7 people, and the remaining 2 were taken care of by Sambit's subordinates. When Sillin entered the house, Sambot and his subordinates looked at Sillin and Cheto strangely. They didn't see Sillin's performance, but 2 subordinates who were responsible for observing Sillin's side did. Just a moment ago, they were still doubting Cheto and Cheto's capabilities, but before they could react, they saw Cheto pull out a gun and shoot at them. Not only that, he was also shooting at them at an extremely fast speed. His speed was so fast that they only realized how many people Cheto had killed when he dragged the dead pursuers inside. Sambot had witnessed the 11th Squad's combat power back at Sector M, and he was shocked once more today. From the moment they discovered the pursuers, to the moment they attacked, to the moment they finished off the entire wave of pursuers, it didn't take more than 3 minutes. Strictly speaking, the time it took to finish off the pursuers was less than a minute, excluding the time they spent waiting vigilantly. When Sambit's bodyguards thought back to every time they ran into a wave of pursuers, they fell silent. Is everyone in Vanguard the same as you? Sambot asked. Nope. Sillin knew what Sambot meant, but if even a 5th, a 10th, or even a 100th of Vanguard's members had Cheto's combat power, the Big Four would have ceased to exist a long time ago. The only one left behind would be Vanguard, the absolute ruler of the high ground. I think so too. Sambot smiled himself. It was obvious that he had thought of the same logic. The pursuers this time were only the first wave. They were the vanguard sent by Yu Linglong's second cousin brother, Yu Xing. There would definitely be more coming after them, but no one knew when they would arrive. However, I advise you to treat the wound on your hand first, and conceal your aura. Sillin took out a small spray bottle. Everyone in the 11th Squad was very familiar with this kind of spray bottle, because they used it often. Sillin told Sambot about the moth from before, and took out a moth. There were 2 tracking moths, and Huimao had eaten one of them. The other one was kept as evidence. Sambot didn't refuse this time, and Pianhua took out his medical equipment of his own accord for Sambot to use. However, Sambot's bodyguard didn't know how to use it, so Pianhua guided him from the side. No, you need to apply the medicine evenly. It can't be too thick. You need to apply another medicine later. Don't apply it too far away from the wound. Pianhua kept instructing the bodyguard on the correct application of the medicine. However, the bodyguard's hands weren't very dexterous, and he wasn't very proficient in this. In the past, when they were injured, they just had to do some simple treatment. After enduring it, they would go to the healing pod and lie down. The medical machinery would help them, so there was no need to do such complicated things. Although the treatment would definitely be much better, the process of applying medicine was really troublesome, and there were many details that needed to be paid attention to. The bodyguard who was more familiar with medicine was injured, so his movements wouldn't be very dexterous. He could only let this person who wasn't familiar with medicine help Sambot. After applying the first medicine, the bodyguard was already sweating profusely. He felt that this was much more difficult than dealing with the pursuers. Seeing this, Sambot waved his hand and looked at Pianhua. I'll have to trouble you to help. They're too clumsy. Okay, it'll be quick. I'm familiar with this, and now that it's done, it'll be much easier for you to go back and do the differentiation treatment. Pianhua picked up the second medicine and began to apply it skillfully. The bodyguard used 5 minutes to apply the first medicine, while Pianhua only used half a minute to apply the second medicine, and then continued with the other treatments. Judging from Pianhua's proficiency, it wasn't hard to imagine that this person had suffered many injuries before. Most of the time, It was these primitive medicines that saved people without any auxiliary machinery. Even the most advanced medical equipment couldn't replace these medicines. And this was something that hunters felt the most deeply. 5 minutes later, Sambot's hand looked much better than before after being treated anew. Sambot and his subordinates had also used the scent concealment spray Sillin had given them before, so they should be able to avoid the tracking moths. It was just that they didn't know what other methods the pursuers might use to track them down. This time, I have to thank you brats, Sambert said. You brats? Huimao tilted his head and looked at Pianhua. It was obvious that this person was a woman at first glance. This old man's eyesight was really bad. It wasn't that Sambot's eyesight was bad, but Pianhua's disguise was too good. After all, Sambot and his men weren't Huimao and Cheto. Sambot moved his newly treated arm and looked at Pianhua again. I suddenly feel that you look a little like an old friend of mine. Just now, Sillin noticed that Sambot's gaze towards Pianhua was a little strange. So this was the reason. However, Sambot's friend Pianhua, who was tidying up the medicine bottles, paused for a moment when he heard Sambot's words. Then he continued to tidy up and asked in a casual tone, Your friend? Who is it? Sifong. Sillin's eyelids twitched. Si. Very quickly, Sillin's attention moved from this surname to this name. He had seen this name before when he went to Sector S with Lung and some of the information Lung had given him. This person wasn't mentioned in the military information the League of Stars government had made public. And the reason why Celine was able to pay special attention to this person was mainly because he was Grandfather Mo's son. Because before Grandfather Mo's son Mo Qing, the person who sat in his position was Si Fong. After Si Fong, Mo Qing then took over Si Fong's position. Si Fong was a famous general of the empire back then. She was also the only woman among the most influential generals. Later on, due to certain matters, Si Fong was sent to Sector S's highest prison. And there was no news of her after that. At the time, Sillin didn't pay attention to the information of a lot of military higher-ups who were sent to the highest prison. But now, looking at Pianhua who was playing with a medicine bottle with her head lowered, Sillin felt a little suspicious. Chapter 398. It wasn't that Sillin was overly sensitive, but when he connected this surname to Sector S's highest prison, and then combined it with some of the information Sillin knew before, the suspicions were too great. He had no choice but to ponder deeply. I thought your eyes looked a lot like hers before, and they looked even more so when you were applying the medicine. Sambot looked at Pianhua, as if he was looking at another person through Pianhua. However, Sambot immediately said regretfully, It's a pity she didn't leave behind any descendants. Pianhua had disguised her appearance, but her eyes were unmodified. It was not easy to deny an old politician's intuition. Perhaps it was because he was betrayed by someone he trusted before that Sambot's trust in his intuition wasn't that strong, but after experiencing an assassination and nursing his wounds, that sense of trust was once again strong, and the strengthening of this sense of trust was based on an inexplicable sense of familiarity. Although Sambot felt that the person in front of him couldn't possibly be the descendant of that old friend, he still suspected that they could be blood relatives or something. Pianhua put away the medicine bottle with a shake of her hand, and sat on a chair with her legs crossed. There are many people in the League of Stars who look alike, and there are many who look exactly the same. Sillin originally wanted to stay and listen to Sambot and Pianhua's conversation, but the communicator in his hand reacted. I'm going to rest first, you guys take your time. Then Sillin walked to the lounge arranged for him on the second floor. Huimao followed Sillin upstairs, and Cheto left with Huimao instead of interrupting Sambot and Pianhua's conversation. However, with their ability, they could hear the content of their conversation even if they weren't there, unless Sambot and the others used a sound barrier. When Sillin arrived at the room, he turned on the communicator. Where have you been this time? Hidden Wuxia said helplessly on the projection. What, you need something? Sillin was curious as to why Hidden Wuxia contacted him so soon. It hadn't been long since they last met. I say, why can't you just sit still? Where are you right now? I accepted a mission. Sillin didn't tell him about it. Accepted a mission? Why are you being so mysterious? Wuxia shot Sillin a strange look. Never mind, it must be something between the 3 sectors. Your 2 hunter regiments have just finished their battle, so it can't be something between the hunter regiments. Plus, even if it's a secret mission for Vanguard, Jifeng wouldn't give it to you. Wuxia was right. Sillin did not deny it. What is it? Sillin asked again. Kane Wuxia stretched out 2 fingers. There are 2 things I want to tell you. Firstly, I think the Big Four is about to be reshuffled. There might be a huge change in the near future. Great change. Yes. Secondly, keep an eye out for the time being. Those lunatics from Miracle will probably do something. People from Miracle? Sillin thinks for a moment and pointed upwards with 3 fingers. What happened over there? It's mainly the military. The struggle between the military is getting more and more intense, and the final conflict might point towards Miracle. Once Miracle gives up, those lunatics from Miracle will do anything. Sillin frowned. Everything really came together as of late. Alright, that's all. Continue with your mission. Wait. Sillin stopped Wuxia, who was about to disconnect. What's your problem? Let me say this first. We're not going to get involved in those things right now. Wuxia tried to clear his name. It's not that. I just want to ask you for some information. Oh, what information? Do you know Sifang? Sillin said. Kane Wuxia, who was scooping an ice cream into his mouth, bit the spoon in half. Why are you asking about her all of a sudden? Instead of answering Wuxia's question, Sillin asked again, then do you know Pianhua? Kane Wuxia pulled out the half-eaten spoon from his mouth and tossed it to the side. He said seriously, you didn't rape her, did you? Sillin. It's fine, it's fine. Seeing Sillin's speechless expression, Wuxia chuckled. It seems you've guessed something. I remember that both Pianhua and I were at the passageway back at Sector S's Grade 1 prison. Why did you drag me in and not Pianhua? Ahem, I didn't know about your relationship with that cat at that time. Otherwise, I wouldn't have left you there at that time, Wuxia thought. At the time, Wuxia did not kill Sillin directly for Pianhua's sake, and Sillin became Wuxia's lackey during the battle against the fog. After that, he didn't pay much attention to the wounded and half-dead Sillin. After hypnotizing Sillin, he left Sillin alone. However, it was also at that time that Ice Cream discovered Huimao's existence. However, Huimao was so busy looking for Sillin that he didn't pay attention to his own kind at all. At the time, Wuxia didn't know that Huimao was with Sillin. That's why I said you know Pianhua. Sillin said affirmatively. Alright, since you want to know, I'll tell you. Kane Wuxia spread his hands. It didn't matter to him anyway. The Sifang you speak of is Si Huang's sister, his biological sister. Pianhua is Sifang's daughter. She gave birth to him in Sector S's highest prison. Sifang passed away not long after she gave birth to Pianhua. At the time, Ho Sifang was old in the eyes of a normal person. However, due to her gene rank, her natural lifespan was much longer than a normal person's. Therefore, she wasn't considered old to people like them. Si Huang was a powerful person, so Sifang, who was related to him by blood, couldn't be much weaker. Even in the highest prison, Sifang shouldn't have died from giving birth. Perhaps he saw Sillin's confusion, Wuxia continued. The prison Sifang was in had a fire not long after she gave birth to Pianhua. 70% of the prisoners in the prison died in the fire. But how could a heavily guarded prison have a fire? How could a normal fire burn down a heavily guarded prison? Kane Wuxia took out an image. This is the scene I took back then. Sillin stared at the image on the projection. The prison was burned to ruins, the reinforced metal walls had all melted, and the ground was covered in a layer of condensed alloy. How high must the temperature of the flames be to melt these special alloy walls into this state? If even metal could be burned to this state, then the people who didn't come out of the prison couldn't. It was premeditated. That was for sure. However, even if it was premeditated, it was still buried in history. Not even the official information had any explanation about the incident. After so many years, probably only a few people who knew the secret behind it would remember it. Do you know why Sifang was stripped of his military rank and sent to the highest prison? Kane Wuxia rubbed his fingers. It's because Sifang slaughtered an entire planet and blew it up. That planet was the most important research base of Miracle at that time. There were too many people involved in Miracle. Xifang slaughtered the most important planet and destroyed their interests. Many people from both the military and the government would definitely be furious. It was no wonder that Xifang was stripped of his military rank and sent to prison. Slaughtering a planet's people wasn't a big deal for people of that level, but it wasn't a small deal either. The key was the reason. This reason could kill you, but it could also save you. Obviously, in the end, some people from both the military and the government found a reason that was enough to send Xifang and some of his subordinates to prison. Then Si Huang. Sillin thinks this was the key person. Si Huang and Xifang had different ideologies. They had their own paths to decide, and neither side interfered with the other. When Xifang was sent to prison, Si Huang also wanted to intervene, but Xifang refused. In a fit of anger, Si Huang ignored her. A few months later, when the prison caught fire, Si Huang was with Azrael for some matters, so he didn't intervene. After that, Si Huang fell into a deep sleep due to his own reasons, so he didn't let Azrael get involved. When he woke up, the first thing he did was kill Orlas. Orlas was one of the 4 Heavenly Edict warriors, and also the one Long told Sillin had killed by Si Huang. At the time, Sillin was wondering why Si Huang wanted to kill that Heavenly Edict warrior. Now, it seemed that it was for Xifang, and Orlas must have had something to do with the fire. Back then, Orlas was very angry because of what happened on that planet Miracle. However, Xifang's military achievements were still there, so he couldn't openly execute him, so he could only resort to underhanded methods. In Unpardonable said as if he was taking pleasure in Xifang's misfortune. Is Si Huang really that powerful? Sillin asked. After all, apart from their own abilities, Heavenly Edict warriors would definitely have a lot of people around them. How could it be that easy to kill Orlas, one of the Heavenly Edict warriors? Heh, you've really hit the nail on the head. Si Huang wouldn't have been able to do it so smoothly by himself, unless he got all the people in Azrael to participate. However, before Si Huang could gather all the people in Azrael, a perfect opportunity presented itself. The person who provided this opportunity was Wei Ting. Wei Ting was also one of the 4 current Heavenly Edict warriors. Other than the Yu family, the Ci family, and Orlas, it was Wei Ting. At the time, Sillin was wondering why Wei Ting, a Heavenly Edict warrior, had become so well-behaved after Orlas's death. He didn't think that Wei Ting had actually schemed against Orlas a long time ago, and was just pretending to be well-behaved. Xifang was one of Wei Ting's generals back then, his most capable assistant, and also the highest-ranking general among those who were punished. If Xifang hadn't been punished back then, the situation in the army might not be like this. After Xifang was punished, some of Xifang's subordinates left Wei Ting and defected to others. I bet they were very disappointed in Wei Ting. It was also at that time that Wei Ting's power was far inferior to the other 3. In my opinion, Wei Ting deserved it. He didn't even dare to admit his own woman and couldn't protect her. How could he still have the face to be a Heavenly Edict warrior? Sillin. I think I've guessed something. It's exactly what you think. That's why I've always felt that those guys were extremely hypocritical. Don't be fooled by how those ordinary people praise the Heavenly Edict warriors like they're gods. After all, they're just humans, not mythical gods. They have a lot of shortcomings, and they have a bad temper. Wei Ting had his own family, and it was normal for people of their status to have a few old lovers. But he didn't admit Xifang. Oh, speaking of this, I have a message for you. Wuxia suddenly remembered and said, back then, Xifang didn't hesitate to massacre that planet and then destroy it. It was actually because of this. And when I said that I wanted you to pay attention to those lunatics from Miracle, it was also because of this. Although Xifang destroyed that planet back then, some of the information was preserved in some of Miracle's branches. After so many years of restoration, it should have recovered to the speed of what it was back then. A large part of the reason why the Ci family has been suppressing Miracle is because of this. Sillin looked at the message in his hand. He suddenly understood why Xifang did what he did back then. This kind of thing, once leaked, was even more dangerous than Zebra. That's why I said that you have to be careful. Your life is the most important thing. If the CI family can't do anything about it, then the others don't have to waste their energy. Wuxia wasn't a compassionate person. Even if almost all the people in the League of Stars were dead, he wouldn't feel much. However, he really cared about the cat in Silen's hand. If something happened to Silen, that cat wouldn't have it easy. If that cat didn't have it easy, then no one would play with little ice cream. After talking with Wuxia, Silen looked at the information Wuxia gave to Silen. This information was incomplete, and it was already very good that Wuxia's people were able to obtain this information. If he wanted to further understand this kind of thing, he still needed to collect more information. While Silen was deep in thought, Huimao poked his head in through the door. Seeing Silen's serious expression, he twitched his ears and jogged over to Silen's shoulder. He patted Silen's face with his paw. Were you talking to Wuxia just now? Although Huimao couldn't monitor the content of Silen and Wuxia's conversation like he could with other communications, Huimao could still know who was talking to. Yes, it was him. Ah, then did you ask him for money? He's still in debt. That bastard. Huimao said angrily. It's eating and dashing. Same thing. In any case, that old man and that stinky rat didn't pay. Silen pulled Huimao off his shoulder and stroked his fur. The information he provided is quite valuable. It's worth a few bastard meals for you. Huimao shook his beard and thought for a while before saying, that's more like it. But if they still dare to eat bastard meals next time, I'll beat them to death. Yes, next time I'll beat them to death. Silen scratched Huimao's chin. How's the eavesdropping going? Huimao pulled his ears to the side, looking very disappointed. It's not useful. Silen thinks the same. However, looking at Sambot, his relationship with Sifong back then should have been quite good. Moreover, Sambot was one of the few people who thought for the people of the League of Stars. No matter how sincere he was, it was still a good thing. What were you thinking about just now? Huimao asked while licking his paw. I was thinking about all the trouble ahead. What's there to think about? If we can't stay in the League of Stars, we can go to Miss Bodhisattva. Miss Bodhisattva has my territory too. Even if we can't survive there, we can still try to explore other galaxies. Miss Bodhisattva and the League of Stars aren't the only places in the universe. With Moon and the others' technology, we don't have to worry about not having a place to stay. Huimao was an open-minded guy. He only cared about a few people anyway. He didn't care about the others. I also want to explore the universe to my heart's content, but it's not easy to do. You humans are so complicated. I think so too. That's why it's so hard to create original robots. Silen sat on the chair and thought for the whole night. Huimao slept on Silen's lap the whole night. His sleeping posture wasn't good, and he would start kicking his legs and paw every time he fell asleep. Silen guessed that he was fighting with ice cream even in his dreams. Other than the assassination attempt at the beginning, no one else had come for the night yet. After a night's rest, Sambot's spirit was much better. His backup hadn't arrived yet, so he stayed here for the time being. Silen had brought enough food with him, so they didn't need to go out to buy it. Therefore, the group stayed in the courtyard to avoid being seen by others. Although there weren't many people around, it was easy to pay attention to unfamiliar faces. The stone bench in the courtyard was occupied by Huimao and Pianhua, so Silen sat on the ground. The ground was covered in weeds. It didn't look good, but it was full of vitality. Silen sat on the grass and started writing and drawing on an electronic tablet. It was all code, and only Silen knew what the code represented. Even if others saw it, they wouldn't know what it meant. After squatting on the stone bench for a while, Huimao jumped onto the grass and rolled a few times. He rolled directly to Silen's side and climbed onto Silen's lap. He changed into a comfortable position and began to sleep with his eyes closed. Silen ignored the grass that Huimao rubbed on his leg and continued to work on the work at hand. Pianhua held her chin and looked at the pair. If this cat ignored the previous incident of eating people, it was really a cute pet cat. The afternoon sun was very good. Pianhua looked at it and also felt a little sleepy. She didn't sleep well last night, not because of the assassination, but because of the people that Sambot mentioned and made her think a lot. Now that she had recovered, Especially when she saw the cat sleeping comfortably, Pianhua's sleepiness came. He looked at the sunlight in the sky, and then around the yard. There weren't any wooden benches, hammocks or anything like that. His gaze swept across the gray cat on Silen's lap once before he walked over to it out of curiosity. He didn't even look at what Silen was writing, and he simply moved the gray cat sleeping across Silen's lap. Huimao lazily raised his head and looked at Pianhua. Then he narrowed his eyes and fell back to sleep. No matter how Pianhua tossed him, he didn't care. After making Huimao into a circle, Pianhua also sat on the ground and rested his head on Huimao's body. The pure natural plush pillow was soft. Silen's movements paused. He looked down at Huimao, who was nestled on his lap, and then looked at Pianhua, who was using Huimao as a pillow. His legs had to bear the weight of a fat cat and a human head. He couldn't move much. If he moved, the man and the cat would start smacking their lips. Not only could he not move his legs under the weight, but Silen looked at the saliva mixed with fish biscuit crumbs flowing out of Huimao's mouth and onto his trousers. There was also the same suspicious liquid flowing out of someone's mouth. Silen's forehead twitched again and again. These two guys. Chapter 399. When Sambot came out to stretch his old bones, he had a strange expression on his face when he saw the group in the courtyard. It would have been fine if the person sleeping on Huimao was a graceful girl, but it just had to be a bearded man. Sambot found it strange no matter how he looked at it. When he was chatting with Pianhua last night, he even suggested that she shave off her beard, so that she would look more energetic. In the end, Pianhua didn't listen to him, and used other words to fool him. In fact, Pianhua thought to herself at the time, "Are you kidding me? It took me a lot of effort to decorate myself. How can I shave it just like that?" A beard was the best way to hide one's appearance and change one's temperament. Moreover, makeup was simple and convenient. At least, that was what she thought. That was why Pianhua would always add a bit of beard whenever she changed clothes. "My lord, that person isn't here." While Sambot was looking at the strange group in the courtyard, one of his subordinates came over and whispered. The person he mentioned was actually Cheto. Sambot trusted Pianhua more than he trusted Silen. After all, Silen was brought here by Yu Linglong, and Sambot had to be careful when it came to anything related to the Yu family. It was inevitable that he would be more vigilant. Even if Silen had saved his life before, Sambot couldn't be at ease. Moreover, after witnessing Cheto's abilities, Sambot paid a lot of attention to him. Silen said that only he and Cheto had come here. But Silen was here, and Cheto was nowhere to be seen. Why would they go out when there was food and other things here? Sambot nodded slightly to show that he understood. Sambot's subordinates recovered very quickly after treatment. Those who worked in this line of work had to have a much stronger physique. Being able to act as Sambot's bodyguards not only earned them deep trust, but their abilities were also guaranteed. The Cheto they spoke of was indeed not in the courtyard. Cheto was collecting information around the civilian area and strengthening the defense network. This way, the signals they detected would be able to filter out the original residents here and screen out the suspicious ones. They couldn't just wait here and do nothing. Cheto was walking in stealth mode. This way, he could observe the people in this area without being discovered. It was as if he was a bystander looking at the true face of this area. Silen told him that this place had changed a little too much, and that the population used to be a lot bigger than it used to be. Cheto had copied some of the information and records of this area, and he was able to understand the situation back then. Even he himself found it hard to imagine that Silen was born in a place like this. Week to week, the people around him, regardless of physique or natural lifespan, were too short. Cheto had heard from Sharo and Shurtang that they lived in the civilian district as well, but the gap between them was too big. The average constitution of the commoners in the Mist Bodhisattva Empire was several times, if not dozens of times stronger. Cheto only needed to do a cursory scan to know the genetic condition of most people in this area. No wonder they had no choice but to live in this place. Cheto saw a lot of people with serious genetic defects, and most of them were children. There were no adults among them because they couldn't grow to adulthood safely. Not even the best genetic medicines had much of a chance to change them. However, these children didn't seem to feel their own sorrow or the death of this area at all. They chatted and played with the adults and their friends. They were too young to understand. Or maybe they didn't even realize that they were one of those who were sad. Or maybe they had grown up too early and gotten over it. Cheto checked the radiation level, heavy metal and poisonous pollution around the area. It had exceeded the resistance range of the children with the lowest genetic quality. If this continued, it would only accelerate the death of these children. There were basically no fish or prawns in the river. When the planetary government built an artificial river, they raised a group of aquatic creatures. However, these creatures didn't survive for long. While fishing was one reason, the other reason was that the productivity of these aquatic creatures was so low that they were destroyed by various factors before they could adapt to the environment. The reason Silen bought a house here wasn't because he wanted to build a huge territory. Instead, he wanted to build a huge underground radiation protection network and a heavy metal filter. This network wouldn't be detected by the sky eye. It wouldn't be detected by the people in this area, but at least the people with the lowest genes would be able to stay in this world for a while longer. They wouldn't wither before they grew up like Hannah did back then. Suddenly, Cheto looked at a certain place. That place belonged to Silen's planning area. And there were some sensing facilities there as well. Just now, Cheto had sensed an abnormal signal coming from that direction. 10 people? This was probably the second group of pursuers after yesterday. Cheto ran towards that direction. Silen had bought the place yesterday, and there were only a few abandoned houses around. Many shadows passed through the abandoned houses so quickly that normal people couldn't see them. Suddenly, the person running at the very front stopped on a half-collapsed wall. Behind him, the other 9 people stopped one after another, and each of them stood in different places, forming a formation. The leader was wearing a mask so that his face couldn't be seen. He could see many things invisible to the naked eye through the mask, such as the invisible Cheto who was walking towards him step by step. The other 9 people were wearing the same equipment, so of course they could see Cheto too. However, the image they saw wasn't clear. They could only see a rough outline, and not Cheto's actual appearance. "Who are you?" the leader asked in a hoarse voice. It was impossible to tell his age from his voice. These people knew that there couldn't be such a powerful person who could hide in front of them in this civilian district. And the information of Sambert's bodyguards didn't show such a person either. So this person was sent by Yu Linglong? Cheto didn't say anything. A series of shots answered them. There were no people from Sambert here, so Cheto didn't need to pretend anymore. His shots were almost silent, and they were very fast. Cheto moved very fast while shooting, so even if these people could see his figure through the mask, they might not be able to keep up with his speed. 7 seconds later, Cheto stopped moving and slowly revealed himself. There was an opening at the tip of each of his fingers, and it was the source of the bullets he shot out. There was no need for him to use a gun at all. He himself was an excellent weapon. However, the bullets he shot this time were a little different. Cheto had added some neural network to them. After taking care of the pursuers yesterday, Silen told Cheto about the arm guard Pianho was wearing. Cheto had modified it after listening to him. Pianho's arm guard was probably given to her by Si Huang. It had a high firing speed and a tracking function, and Cheto was very suitable for this kind of weapon. The bullets Cheto fired from his fingertips were a part of himself, and they could track their target under his control. Their firing speed might not be as fast as Silen's Purgatory Thunder Snake, but even if they were blocked once, Cheto could still control them to track their target after they hit the ground. Unless the mechanical nerves inside the bullet were destroyed and the connection was severed, or if the bullet was beyond a certain range and Cheto couldn't control it anymore, the bullet would continue to track its target until it successfully caught up to its target. This group of 10 didn't expect to run into an opponent like this. Some of them didn't manage to dodge the bullets, and those who did didn't expect the bullets to fly at them again in the next moment. Cheto's own speed was taken into account, so the entire conflict took less than 10 seconds. Cheto was pretty satisfied with the result after looking at the 10 people who had died. He waved his hand, and the bullets returned to Cheto's hand and merged back into his body. After taking care of the corpses, Cheto continued to collect information. Over at the courtyard, Silin was aware of the signal when the protective network set up there emitted it. Even the sleeping Huimao's ears twitched. When Cheto was dealing with the 10 people, Wuxia's head shot up and its eyes were as wide as saucers. His first thought, Cheto has gotten stronger again. His second thought, meow my shiny fur. Pianhua's saliva touched Huimao's fur a little. After Huimao woke up, he raised his front paw and slapped Pianhua. Then the man and the cat began to quarrel, push, yell, and scratch as they entered the building from Silin's side. After entering Pianhua's room, the man and the cat stopped at the same time. Silin won't be angry, right? Piping Hua poked the gray cat beside him who was deep in thought. I don't think so. Huimao remembered that he had eaten a lot of fish biscuits before he went to sleep. Just now he saw some suspicious debris and the smell of fish biscuits, and dried fish on Silin's pants other than the saliva marks. After Pianhua and Huimao ran into the building, Silin looked at the 2 large saliva marks on his pants, and then at the man and cat who had been hiding inside for a long time. He patted the grass and half-dried food on his pants. These 2 fellows escaped really quickly. Sambot and the others didn't know that Cheto had taken care of the second group of pursuers outside. Even Pianhua couldn't tell if Silin knew or not. After all, she had something from Sihuang. Cheto returned at night. Some of the necessary arrangements had been completed, and some of the planned projects could be completed tomorrow. Huimao was in charge of digging the land. For the next 2 days, Sangbai was puzzled as to why there were no more pursuers. He had also suspected Celine until Pianhua told him that Celine and the others had secretly taken care of 2 groups of pursuers. Only then did Sangbai understand. After Cheto took care of the 10 pursuers, another group came over and was taken care of by both Huimao and Cheto. Silin stayed in Sambit's courtyard all this time while Cheto and Huimao went to finish the underground project. On the 5th day, Yu Linglong contacted Silin and told him that the reinforcements had arrived. After verifying each other's identities, Silin brought Sambot to the place where the reinforcements had landed. There was an invisible spaceplane parked there. Silin didn't know the reinforcements, but Sambot did. Sambot conversed with the person, and it seemed that their relationship was pretty good. Yu Linglong was also considerate. Is our mission complete, Silin? Huimao patted Silin's shoulder. Yes. Yu Linglong only told Silin to hand Sambot over to the reinforcements, and that the mission was over. The person talking to Sambot glanced at Silin and waved his hand. The 2 people inside the spaceplane carried out 3 big boxes one after another. Inside the boxes were the rewards for this mission. The boxes were filled with rare metals, and any one of them could be sold for a good price. Whis curled its tail in satisfaction when it saw the 3 boxes. It naturally began to value these metals. After subtracting their expenses for this trip, subtracting Silin's enormous underground defense network, and subtracting Lord Cat's own hard work, there was still a lot of money left. It was enough to buy a lot of fish biscuits. Celine, thank you for this time. Sambot thanked Silin sincerely before he left. Although he wasn't satisfied with the Yu family, Sambot knew that if he and his subordinates hadn't run into Silin, they wouldn't have had it so easy. You're welcome. It's just a mission. Sambot paused and asked, do you agree with the Yu family's point of view? I don't know what the Yu family's point of view is, or what position they stand on. I'm just a hunter. Silin looked at Sambot. You've done very well. Compared to a lot of people, Sambot had done very well in his position. This was Silin's affirmation of Sambot. Sambot smiled and didn't say anything else. He walked into the spaceplane with his subordinates. Before he entered the spaceplane, Sambot glanced at Pianhua again and sighed regretfully. The spaceplane rose into the air and quickly disappeared from sight. It was far away from this planet. Silin, where are you going next? Pianhua followed behind Silin and asked. Sector S, Pianhua. Originally, Pianhua was planning to follow Silin and see how a hunter squad hunted, but Silin's next destination was her hometown, Sector S. She didn't have much freedom after entering Sector S. After all, the 3 forces that controlled Sector S right now were all acquaintances. Are you going to find Flying Snake or Zhen Xingfu? Pianhua asked. I'm going to find the queen. Silen's answer puzzled Pianhui a lot. Engenia, the queen of Sector S, had always treated everyone coldly, but as far as she knew, Engenia treated Silen exceptionally well. Even better than she treated Zhen Xingfu and the others. Moreover, not long after Silen's squad left for Golden Beginning, the usually depressed and dispirited Yuan Xingfu became a lot more cheerful. He was no longer as gloomy as he used to be, and although he still looked sickly, it was a huge change compared to before. After thinking about it, Pianhui decided to return with Silen and the others. It was about time they returned. However, they had to be prepared to be scolded by their master again. Every time they went out, Pianhui couldn't avoid a scolding when she returned. Every time she was scolded, Pianhui would continue to go out as usual, and the current Fire Phoenix didn't stop her either. Before they left, Silen went to the yard where Genya used to live, and stuck the curly leaf pattern on his finger onto the almost bald Fuji tree. In the next moment, the tree entered the ring. The place where the Fuji tree used to be was sunken. There was no longer a Fuji tree here. Are we still coming here in the future? Huimao asked. Of course, Silen answered. When? I don't know. It could be a few years or a few decades. No matter how long it would be, they would still come and visit. Pianhui didn't board the same spaceplane as Silen and the others. She had her own spaceplane, and Sambot and the others were the ones who had come here earlier. Silen didn't call the 11th squad because this was a private matter. It was fine if he led the squad to the place last time, but there was no need to call the 11th squad this time. They had their own plans. Just like Wuxia said, the vanguard after the battle had grown even more nervous than before. It was a vague sign that another storm was about to arrive. A storm that would reshuffle all the cards. It didn't matter if it was the conflict in the hunter world, the conflict in the military, or the contest between the politicians. None of these things could affect Sector S. The former prison was the reason Sector S was immune to the first 3 invasions. After the collapse of the almost independent prison system, it was scattered and infiltrated into the forces and organizations of Sector S. Now it was guarded by the 3 great forces together. It was extremely difficult for any outside force to interfere. There might be a lot of people who looked down on the ragtag army of Sector S, but if the people who were once imprisoned were taken into consideration, then this ragtag army couldn't be underestimated. There were killers, abandoned hunters, defeated politicians, and former generals in the military. After the prison was removed, these people were integrated into what people thought was a motley crew. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Sector S's security was relatively tight, but Silen had publicized his identity verification information and emphasized that the spaceplane belonged to Golden Beginning the moment he entered Sector S. Of course, he wouldn't reveal his personal information. Silen had the pass Engenia gave him, and the 3 great forces patrolling Sector S didn't try to stop Silen. Therefore, Silen's journey into Sector S had been smooth. However, before Silen could head to Golden Beginning's headquarters, a patrol team from Fire Phoenix intercepted them. To be more precise, the patrol team's target was Pianhui. However, since Silen's spaceplane and Pianhui's spaceplane were flying together, they were stopped at the same time. The other party didn't mean any harm, and they greeted Silen politely when they intercepted them. According to Pianhui's reaction, the interloper was very familiar with her, and they invited Silen to join them. These people wouldn't attack Silen and his group. From the conversation Huimao eavesdropped, it was obvious that the interloper just wanted to entertain Pianhui's friends, Silen and his group. Got it, Cheto said. Before entering the patrol ship, Cheto found out the interloper's identity and former identity based on the name and image mapping Huimao overheard. Silen had obtained some military information from Wuxia, but it was information from more than a decade ago. Even Wuxia might not be able to get his hands on the latest detailed information. Cheto was the one who found the interloper's identity through this information. Ranzai, former colonel of the League of Stars Army, subordinate to General Si Fong. Cheto projected all the information he could find. It wasn't detailed, but it was enough to get a general idea of the interloper's former identity. Ranzai was one of the people who was demoted and imprisoned along with General Si Fong during the incident. However, he wasn't imprisoned in the highest level prison. The lowest military rank in the highest level prison was originally a major general, and Ranzai wasn't qualified back then. However, it was exactly because of this that Ranzai didn't die in a sea of fire with the people in the highest level prison. He joined Fire Phoenix after the prison was abolished. Chapter 400. This was an opportunity. If he was one of Si Fong's former subordinates, he would definitely know about that incident. The patrol ship's hatch was already open, and its indicator lights were flashing. Sillin piloted the spaceplane and followed Pianhua into the patrol ship. Just after he got off the spaceplane, Sillin heard a burst of heroic laughter before he could even stand firm. "Pianhua, you're finally back." Following the voice, Sillin looked over and saw a middle-aged man wearing a Fire Phoenix combat uniform walking over. The newcomer was Ranzai. Compared to 20 years ago when he was in the prime of his youth, one could still vaguely see his original angular face when he was young, but his tall and sturdy body, after more than 20 years, did not have the slightest crooked. He was still straight, his eyes were bright, and when he looked at Pianhua, he had the loving smile of an elder. "Uncle Ran, I've missed you so much." Pianhua jumped over and gave Ranzai a hug. "Hey, you little brat." Ranzai tugged at the fake beard on Pianhua's face. "You look more daring than last time." Of course, Pianhua was very satisfied with his disguise this time. Ranzai was already used to Pianhua's disguise. After looking at Pianhua for a moment, his gaze moved to Sillin. "Sillin, is it? I received a message from the Queen just now. She knew you had entered Sector S the moment you entered, and was about to send someone to welcome you. She knew I was here, so she asked me to keep you here. Someone will come to pick you up soon." For the sake of Pianhua and Angenia, Ranzai was still very polite to Sillin. At the very least, the smile on his face wasn't fake. Ranzai's gaze swept past Sillin before landing on Cheto. He paused for a moment, and then moved away with a smile. Then he led Pianhua and Sillin into the patrol ship. Ranzai wasn't very curious about Sillin. After all, he didn't know much about Sillin. He only knew that Sillin was a member of Vanguard, and was familiar with Golden Beginning's queen, Angenia. However, when Ranzai looked at Cheto just now, he had a very strange feeling. He felt that this person was very special, and he couldn't see through him. As for the cat on Sillin's shoulder, it was completely ignored. After that, Ran arranged a room for Sillin and Cheto to rest and entertain them a little. Then she went to chat with Pianhua. After eating and drinking to his heart's content, Huimao lay down on the soft bed and curled himself into a ball to sleep. Since he had to wait for the people from Golden Beginning to pick him up, he didn't have to worry about eating and drinking. There was a saying that went, "Sleep when you're full." This was a famous saying that Huimao had always believed in. Sillin sat on a chair in the room and continued to write and draw with the electronic tablet in his hand. He was studying the information about the miracle that Wuxia had given him, but he was afraid that he wouldn't make much progress even if he continued to study it. The doorbell rang while Sillin was writing. It was Ranzai. After he was done chatting with Pianhua, he came to check on Sillin. After all, Sillin was a guest, and an important guest of Angenia at that. It was not good to neglect him. Moreover, when Ranzai and Pianhua were chatting just now, Pianhua's evaluation of Sillin was very high as well. Ranzai's attitude toward Sillin had improved a lot. "Are you used to this place? Can't sleep?" Ranzai glanced at the fat cat who was sleeping comfortably on the bed and asked Sillin. Logically speaking, after driving for a long time, the cat should have fallen asleep very quickly after relaxing. He didn't look at what Sillin was writing on the tablet. Ranzai had always respected privacy. "No, the arrangements here are very good. There are just some things I can't figure out." Sillin stopped writing and answered, "Oh, what can't you figure out?" Ranzai was very curious. Young people like Sillin were at the age where they were full of ambition. Ranzai felt that Sillin should have some common problems that young people of his age would have, so he was prepared to talk to him. However, Sillin's next action made the smile on Ranzai's face freeze. Sillin drew something on the tablet in his hand, then turned the tablet to face Ranzai. Looking at what Sillin was drawing on the tablet, Ranzai's expression became serious. The air pressure around him seemed to have dropped a lot. The image on the tablet was of a very special animal. It looked a little dreamy, but as Ranzai used to hold an important position under Sealang, he was too familiar with this icon. In fact, for the past 20 years he would often dream of it. Every time he woke up he would be covered in cold sweat. What do you mean? Ranzai no longer had a smile on his face. His face was very pale, and his voice was a little hoarse. Due to the sudden change in his emotions, his voice was trembling when he spoke. The Nightmare Taper, the military's secret project. Back at Sector M, Sillin had encountered the products of the Nightmare Taper project before. However, those products were not the most important project of the Nightmare Taper project. Based on the information Sillin knew, the first phase of the Nightmare Taper project was the DKC series of multi-purpose titanium guns, and the second phase was some weapons of mass destruction. The one Sillin encountered at Sector M was one of the second phase of the Nightmare Taper project. However, there was nothing in the information Sillin knew about Wuxia at all. In the information given by Wuxia, this was the symbol of the image. This image was slightly different from the one Sillin knew about the Nightmare Taper project. It carried a kind of evil aura. The Nightmare Taper project had begun a long time ago, and its starting point was the Nightmare Taper. The research that came later was actually a cover for this initial project. Once the cover was removed, the Nightmare Taper was what the people valued the most. Back then, Sifong was dismissed from his post and imprisoned because of the Nightmare Taper incident. 20 years later, Wuxia said that the Nightmare Taper might make a comeback. Sillin paid no attention to Ranzai's expression and continued, I believe that you, as General Sifong's subordinate, should know this very well. Ranzai stared hard at Sillin for a while. He wanted to see the emotion in Sillin's eyes and what his goal was. However, Ranzai could not see anything. Before this, he even thought that Sillin was troubled by the same thing as other young people his age. He would never have guessed that it would be this nightmarish thing even if he was beaten to death. Moreover, since Sillin was able to mention Sifong and the fact that he used to hold an important position under Sifong, Ranzai knew that the young man in front of him might not know everything about him, but he had a general understanding of him. After some thought, Ranzai calmed himself down and said, What's your goal? Sillin shook his head. Ranzai was suspecting that he had bad intentions towards the Nightmare Taper. So Sillin had to explain himself. I know Pianhuo's identity. I know some things about General Sifong back then. I also know about the mass imprisonment incident back then, and the disaster in the highest prison. I know that all of you who participated in the Taper extermination incident back then have strong feelings of rejection and hatred towards the Nightmare Taper. However, do you think that all of you were able to exterminate it back then? Ranzai's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? I heard that although you guys destroyed that planet back then, some important information was still there. The people from Miracle continued the Nightmare Taper project with that information as the foundation. Over 20 years was enough for them to do many things. Lin Huang said, I heard that although you guys destroyed that planet back then, some important information was still there. Ranzai clenched his fists tightly as he listened to Sillin. The veins on the back of his hands popped up. It was terrifying. Isn't Orlos dead? Sillin could sense Ranzai's hatred towards Orlos from his tone. Orlos is dead, but the other interest groups are still around. The Nightmare Taper has gained a lot of supporters over the years, said Sillin. The benefits that the Nightmare Taper brought were enough to drive those people crazy. How could they let it go just because of Orlos? They had been waiting for decades for the Nightmare Taper to be born, right? However, back then, there was Sifong who dared to be so ruthless. What about now? Who would do it? Even if they dared, it was already too late. Miracle has already taken over the Nightmare Taper follow-up project. The League of Stars is in a mess now. There are many people who support Miracle, but there are also many people who oppose Miracle. However, many people don't know that Miracle is carrying this demonic thing. If Miracle is going to be destroyed by then, they will definitely release the nightmare taper that they have been raising for so many years before they die, said Sillin. Ranzai knew very well how crazy those people were. Many people had died in the Elimination Taper project back then, and he was one of the few survivors. It was because he had experienced it himself that he knew how terrifying that thing was. When the Elimination Taper project was launched back then, those things had not fully matured, so only a few people survived. However, if that thing had fully matured and was released, the consequences would be unimaginable. Ranzai stared straight at Sillin. He wanted to see if Sillin was telling the truth from Sillin's eyes. Why should I believe what you said? Why should I believe that you won't be greedy for that thing? Greedy? Sillin smiled. If I want to destroy a planet, I can do it anytime. In this world, there are many things that can do that other than the nightmare taper. Sillin's voice did not fluctuate much, and it sounded very calm. However, what he said sent chills down Ranzai's spine. With his eyes, he could tell that Sillin was not lying. Ranzai had seen too many people who were the same age as Sillin. However, the Sillin in front of him made Ranzai change his impression of him over and over again. Destruction is easier than persuading and saving, so people prefer destruction. That was what Sifong had said back then. Sifong knew very well what those people would do with the nightmare taper. He knew what would happen if the nightmare spread, so he resisted the pressure and carried out the Elimination Taper project. The nightmare taper has a great name, but it's a combination of a nightmare and a nightmare. I don't know how much you know about it, but from what I know, it's a combination of two devils. They were originally a kind of microscopic parasite that could drift in space. Later, they were discovered by that group of people and put into research as a deadly virus carrier in another experiment. The experiment results were very successful. Since then, when those people carried out related research, they would use this parasite as a carrier to infect the target. That's because when this parasite exists, the deadly virus will concentrate on the parasite when there are no other hosts. The source of the virus can't be detected in the air. Even if it's in the water or the water next to the parasite, the source of the virus won't be detected. Moreover, the parasite that carries the virus isn't affected. That's why those people named this parasite the nightmare taper. The nightmare taper could devour nightmares and bring the nightmares that it had devoured back to life. For more research, those people modified the parasite so that it could carry more viruses at the same time. They also implanted control bodies in them. You can imagine that if someone wanted to destroy a certain organization on a planet, he wouldn't have to send a large number of elite troops, armored tanks, fighter jets, and so on. All he would have to do is to control a nightmare taper to enter the planet and infect humans and other living things. The virus can't be in the air or in pure water, but it can be transmitted from the nightmare taper to humans. The infected humans will then infect others. The nightmare taper is like a transfer station that transfers the virus to other living things. It will accumulate and infect others continuously. The spread of the virus is beyond people's imagination. If it happened on a planet that was isolated from the world, only the living things on the planet would be affected. However, what if it happened on a new planet that had frequent communication with the outside world? Then, it would spread in a radial manner. Back then, there was a planet that was used as a test. It turned from a planet that was full of life into a dead planet. Thousands of deadly viruses wreaked havoc on the planet, and the cause was just a nightmare taper. No one had the time to create a vaccine or an effective medicine. It was gone just like that. That's why General C gave the order to destroy the taper after he learned about this. At this point, Ran let out a mocking laugh. Those people at Sector V are still clamoring about how the military is heartless, but they have no idea how much General C helped them back then. Originally, when the first batch of adult nightmare tapers were created, their main targets were the famous thugs in the League of Stars at Sector V. If General C hadn't destroyed the taper first, Sector V would have been cleansed 20 years ago. Osculos, the man they worship, is also one of the nightmare taper's supporters. What right do they have to clamor? What right do they have to cheer after General C is imprisoned and talk about dogs biting each other? They don't understand anything. They don't understand anything. Rand stuffed his hands into his hair, lowered his head and covered his eyes with his palms. It had been so many years, but the events of the past were still vivid in his mind. They had been wronged and punished, but they did not regret it. However, they felt pity for their brothers who had died. All their military achievements had been denied, and there were no longer any records about them in the files of the Star Alliance's army. They were people who had been abandoned by history. Sillin was silent. If Sifong hadn't given the order to destroy the taper 20 years ago, and if the people who participated in the operation hadn't sacrificed their lives, there might not be Tang Kakikyu today. There might not be the Freedom Army, and there might not be the Sector V of today. Perhaps it would have become a colony a long time ago. From an all-powerful general to a prisoner in the League of Stars' highest prison. What kind of mentality did the people trapped in the prison feel when they experienced the ups and downs of life? When this life was over and they looked back, they still wouldn't regret what they did back then. It was their own choice, the life they decided to live. Sifong was such a person back then. A general's personality could affect his subordinates. Ranzai told Sillin a lot about the nightmare taper. However, Ranzai didn't know much about it, so the advice she could give Sillin was limited. However, Ranzai replayed the taper eradication incident so that Sillin could better understand the people abandoned by history. Other than the nightmare taper, Ranzai also told Sillin about Sifong and Pianhua. She was so emotional that she couldn't even stop talking. Back then, when the Supreme Prison was in trouble, General C handed Pianhua over to someone. That person owed General C a favor, and General C's request was for her to take Pianhua away. Moreover, in the future, she was to give Pianhua the right to choose and freedom. Pianhua's name came from that fire. After being in the prison, we understand the strong yearning for freedom better. However, I heard that General C was very calm in the prison. I don't know if General C was really as indifferent as they said, but I know that no matter what the result was, whether she was sentenced to prison or framed, General C didn't regret it. When the prison was on fire, the prison's protective net gate was opened by the prison warden, so that the important people inside could escape. However, General C didn't leave. There were still a few people who followed her. Not only General C and the others, but some high-ranking military officials like General C didn't come out either. They were sentenced to life imprisonment, but they chose to stay inside. Actually, I know that General C didn't come out not only because of the so-called dignity of a soldier. She didn't want to implicate more people. Only when General C is gone, those who escaped and survived won't be restricted by the military. Sifong was marked with Wei Ting's label, so the people who followed Sifong were also marked with Wei Ting's label. Those people didn't stay there because of Wei Ting, but because of Sifong. Just like what Wuxia said, if Sifong was still alive, the military's current situation wouldn't be like this. Without Sifong, the original subordinates all chose their own paths, choosing the direction they wanted. For example, Ranzai, if Sifong was still alive, Ranzai would definitely continue to follow Sifong and return to the military. However, Sifong wasn't around, and Ranzai was recruited by people from Fire Phoenix. At first, Ranzai just muddled along, but after meeting Pianhua, he decided to officially stay in Fire Phoenix. Even if Pianhua often disguised himself, there were still times when he wasn't disguised. With one look, Ranzai could recognize him. This was because Pianhua and Sifong looked too similar. Ranzai chatted with Sillin for a long time. After they finished, Ranzai adjusted his emotions and walked out. Walking in the passageway, Ranzai felt a little strange. He felt that he had said too much today. Although there were some things that he was prepared to tell Sillin, he still said too much. As he walked, Ranzai's footsteps slowed down. The expression on his face changed a few times. Finally, he laughed and scolded. "Stinking brat, you actually hypnotized me." Chapter 401. Ranzai wasn't angry at Sillin's hypnosis. After all, he came from the military, and he knew a little about hypnosis. He knew that Sillin meant no harm. At first, Ranzai just wanted to see if Sillin was lying from Sillin's eyes, but he fell for it himself. It was easier for a person to trigger their true emotions through eye contact. Ranzai was excited just now. He had been holding it in for more than 20 years. And he had always wanted to vent the words in his heart. However, it was a secret that could not be made public. Only a handful of people knew about it, and it could only be buried in history. Sillin, on the other hand, only played the role of a primer. He didn't forcefully interfere with Ranzai's emotions, and that was why Ranzai wasn't angry. Ranzai had said everything he wanted to say, and Sillin didn't force him to say anything else. Ranzai remained tight-lipped. That was enough. Back then, Sillin learned the general situation of the taper eradication incident from Wuxia, and today he learned more detailed information from Ranzai. Many of his doubts were answered now. The person who owed Sifang a favor and took Bianhua away was the current leader of Fire Phoenix, the current Fire Phoenix. Only this person had the ability to protect Bianhua from the fire back then. The current Fire Phoenix fulfilled his promise, and he didn't force Bianhua no matter how much he thought highly of her. He respected Bianhua's choice and allowed her to roam freely when the prison was still there. Now he did the same. Moreover, Bianhua had received some help from Si Huang. Up until now, Bianhua hadn't encountered any serious threat to her life. At least, that was what Bianhua showed others. Due to Ranzai's occupation, he couldn't explain the nightmare taper in detail, and he didn't provide much help to Sillin. However, he told Sillin that if he wanted to know more about the nightmare taper, he could look for a person, Onesta. Onesta was one of the officers under Sifang's command, and he had participated in the taper eradication operation. Just like Ranzai, he wasn't locked up in the highest prison, and survived to this day. He was absorbed by Sector S's forces. Most importantly, Onesta's profession was important. Back then, Onesta was a military doctor. He was valued by Sifang because he could follow a military doctor to the front line. It went without saying that he should know a lot more about the nightmare taper. Onesta wasn't in Fire Phoenix. A long time ago, before the prison was revoked, and everyone was thrown into the prison after being stripped of their military uniforms. Compared to Ranzai and the others, Onesta was treated better. This was because there were people to take care of him. Many knew that the prison system of Sector had connections with the local forces. Fang. Sector S's prison had Sector had. And Bar. Pen Queen was the Queen, and Queen had was Sector. Onesta was one of Engenia's targets, and they had grown familiar with each other. That was why Engenia had sent someone to fetch Onesta as soon as the prison was revoked. Once Sillin arrived at Golden Beginning, he would be able to find Onesta and learn more about the situation. The people Engenia sent to fetch Sillin soon arrived, and they were led by Zhen Xingfu. Zhen Xingfu's gene rank had skyrocketed after the second injection, and his physique was like heaven and earth compared to before. However, Zhen Xingfu still gave off the impression that he was as thin and weak as he was before. There were two reasons why Zhen Xingfu looked thin and weak. First, they didn't want to make it public. Zhen Xingfu had kept the fact that his physique had changed a secret, and no one except the few closest people knew that his Zhen Xingji and Gunxing's innate qualities had changed drastically. In the past, they could only rely on their bodyguards to assassinate them, and if their bodyguards were unreliable, they could only rely on weapons and protective equipment. If none of those worked, then they could only pray for their own good. But now they might be able to deliver a fatal blow to their target when they weren't paying attention. Secondly, Zhen Xingfu's attire was loose and empty. Engenia must have purposely designed it so that he would look the same as before, and Zhen Xingfu's deliberate disguise was enough to fool people. Although Zhen Xingfu still gave off the impression that he was as thin and weak as he used to be, his temperament had changed. Just like Pianhua said, Zhen Xingfu was a lot brighter than before. He was no longer as gloomy and fickle as before. We finally meet again, Sillin. Zhen Xingfu strode forward and fist-bumped Sillin. At the same time, he also greeted Huimao, who was lying on Sillin's shoulder. Huimao responded politely. Zhen Xingfu was the descendant of his second grandpa's master, so he counted as one of his own. Of course he had to treat his own people differently. Ranzai watched the conversation between Zhen Xingfu and Sillin from the side. He knew that Engenia valued Sillin a lot, but he didn't think that Sillin and Zhen Xingfu would be this close. There were a lot of people in Sector S who knew that the Zhen family were untrustworthy and unapproachable people. However, it was obvious that Zhen Xingfu was familiar with Sillin, and the smile on his face wasn't formal or perfunctory. It was sincere. Ranzai's opinion of Sillin rose even higher. Yo, young Master Fu, I can't believe you're the one who led the team here. How rare. Pianhua exclaimed. They were all acquaintances, so they spoke more casually than usual. Everyone in their generation had worked together before the three great forces came to power, so they knew each other very well. Of course. It's rare for Sillin to show up, so it's only natural that we come to welcome him. Zhen Xingfu chatted with Ran and Pianhua for a bit longer before he dragged Sillin away, like he was in a hurry. His grandmother was still waiting for him at Golden Beginnings headquarters. After Golden Beginnings starship had left, Pianhua stroked his fake beard and said, I can't shake the feeling that Angenia and the Zhen family are too close to Sillin. They almost look like family. I would have thought the same if there wasn't no concrete proof after multiple investigations, Ranzai replied. As one of the three great forces, they had investigated the leaders of Golden Beginning many times before. However, there was no evidence that Queen Angenia had another child, and Zhenxing only had a son and a daughter. Have you found anything about Queen Angenia's husband? Pianhua asked. No. That person is too mysterious, and he's still a mystery to this day. Ranzai had investigated the trash that the elders of Sector S mentioned many times, but the more he investigated, the more puzzled he became. The trash that everyone mentioned was familiar with the Food King, and his origins were unknown. It was said that he was a person from outside of Sector S, and he disappeared after that. Some people said that the trash was dead because his gene rank was very low, and he couldn't support a long lifespan. He had already started aging when he disappeared back then, so one could only imagine what had happened to him after so many years had passed. However, Ranzai couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Queen Angenia was a famous person in Sector S, and she was the one who single-handedly developed Golden Beginning to its current scale and status. However, the trash that everyone called Zhen family had always been in her heart. If he really was a trash without any merits, how could the great queen of Golden Beginning have been obsessed with him for so many years? How could he be so close to the Food King? So close to the extent that the Food King would mercilessly slap his own children and descendants away if they spoke ill of him. Pianhua suddenly thought of something and asked Ranzai, what was the name of the person you mentioned back then? Ranzai thought for a moment and answered, I remember. His name was Genya. Genya. Pianhua sucked in a deep breath. The planet I visited this time is the birthplace of Sillin. I learned that Sillin's master is also called Genya. Pianhua didn't know about Genya because Sillin told her. She learned it from the information of the local population, and she had investigated the little yard when she chose it as a shelter. She heard that the owner of the yard had been dead for many years. Is what you said true? Ranzai was surprised. If it was true, then the trash that everyone called him back then wasn't trash after all. At the very least, a person who could raise a disciple like Sillin was definitely no ordinary person. I remember that there was a tree in that yard that looked very similar to the one I saw at Golden Beginnings headquarters. Although I could only catch a glimpse of it at Golden Beginning and couldn't see it up close, I'm sure it's the same kind of tree. That kind of tree was very special and strange. Pianhua had been to many places, but she had never seen a tree similar to the one at Golden Beginning. However, the almost bald tree in Sillin's yard was the same kind of tree as the one at Golden Beginning. While Pianhua and Ranzai were discussing Sillin and Genya, Zhen Xingfu had brought Sillin and the others to Golden Beginnings headquarters. This time, Angenia and Zhenxing welcomed them personally. Unlike last time, there were two more people this time. One was Zhen Xingfu's younger sister, Zhen Xingji, and the other was the star hunter Prisa who often kept Zhen Xingji here. This was the first time Sillin met Prisa. She was Zhen Xingfu's aunt, and it was impossible to tell her age based on her appearance. However, the temperament and charm that flowed out of her every movement told everyone that she wasn't a young girl who knew nothing, but someone who had experienced many things and had a story to tell. There were rumors that Prisa and Zhenxing were biological siblings, and that they were both born to Angenia. However, there were other theories as well. In short, Prisa's background was a mystery to many people. That being said, Sillin knew that Prisa and Genshin couldn't be biological siblings. Prisa didn't have the Gen family's bloodline, and she had displayed great strength and high gene rank from the very beginning. She wasn't like Genshin and the others who had the Gen family's bloodline. Moreover, Sillin believed that Angenia wouldn't look for another man. However, Prisa must have a lot of connections to become a star hunter, and it was far beyond anyone's imagination. After all, Sector S was a prison sector back in the day. Anything could happen in a place like this. Angenia, who always gave off a dignified image, smiled lovingly when she saw Sillin. She pulled Sillin to her side and spoke to him. Those who had seen this before were immune to it, but those who hadn't were completely stunned by it. Even if they didn't show it on their faces, they were shocked to the core. Is this Sillin the queen's illegitimate son? Or is he Boss Yuan's illegitimate son? That being said, young Master Fu wouldn't be smiling so happily if he was Boss Yuan's illegitimate son. The smiles on these people's faces weren't faked. Zhen Xingji and her older brother were standing behind their father and grandmother. They were staring curiously at the young man who was chatting happily with her grandmother. He looked to be about the same age as her, so how did he make her serious grandmother smile like that? That's the kind of smile a grandmother should have toward a junior, isn't it? It was pitifully rare for her and her older brother to smile like this. Angenia brought Sillin to the courtyard where the Fuji tree was planted. There were a few Fuji trees that were growing pretty well in the courtyard. The reason why the Fuji tree was called the upper tree was because it was special compared to other plants. It could grow 10 years in 1 year, or it could not grow even a centimeter in 10 years. It all depended on the mood of the tree, and the main factor that affected the tree's mood was the Gen family. The tree would only grow in a place where the Gen family was present. For example, the Fuji tree was growing very well when Genya was still in the courtyard on planet Brown Earth. It was so lush that it looked like a 100-year-old tree in just a short time. However, the tree stopped growing after Genya left, and it was growing worse every year. The Fuji tree in Golden Beginnings courtyard might not be as good as the tree in the courtyard on planet Brown Earth, but it was still a rare sight. Perhaps Genya didn't expect that the seeds he gave to Angenia as a gift would grow to such an extent, right? Very few people could enter this courtyard. Even Pianhua, who came with Fire Phoenix as a guest, could only look at it through the wall. Therefore, Sillin didn't have to worry too much about this place. Here. Angenia looked around the courtyard, wondering if she should find a better empty space. Sillin waved his hand and pointed at a spot in the middle of the trees. That's fine. As he said this, Sillin walked over and crouched down on the empty space in the middle of the trees. He stretched out his finger and pressed the curly leaf pattern against the ground. The next moment, there was a crackling sound. A large tree seemed to break out of the ground. Although it was bald, its branches were thicker than the branches of the trees in the courtyard. Following the appearance of this tree, the surrounding trees first moved outwards, as if to make room for this tree. After the tree appeared and stabilized, they all moved closer to it. After the tree broke out of the ground, its roots under the ground began to grow. It was here that it sensed a familiar presence that it hadn't seen for a long time. This made it very happy. The immediate reaction of its happiness was that green buds began to sprout on its originally bald branches. The buds grew larger and denser. Zhen Xingfu and the others were stunned. Even Zhenxing and Angenia, who had some understanding of the Fuji tree, were stunned by this scene. Angenia knew that the Fuji tree had spirit energy. Genya had told her many things about this tree, but she had never seen it with her own eyes. This was the first time she had felt it so deeply. Angenia knew that the Fuji tree had spiritual energy. Genya had told her many things about the tree, but she had never seen it with her own eyes. This was the first time she felt so strongly about it. Yes, it's always been in his courtyard. He likes to sit on the wooden rocking chair under this tree and look at the sky. The tree reminded Sillin of the past. Yes, it's always been in his courtyard. He likes to sit on the wooden rocking chair under this tree and look at the sky. The tree reminded Sillin of the past. However, those people might not be able to reappear in the future. Angenia wanted to stay here for a while longer. As for what Sillin had told her about Ernest, Anjinia told Zhen Xingfu to take Silin to find him. Zhen Xingfu asked Silin a lot of excited questions about his grandfather Zhenya, while they were on their way to find him. Silin told him some of the things he knew, but he chose to keep the most important things to himself. It might not necessarily be a good thing to reveal them now. Zhen Xingji wrinkled his nose at Silin's tight-lipped behavior. Is he really that mysterious? Even Grandma and Aunt Prisa couldn't find out what kind of person Grandpa was, even though he had never met him before. Zhen Xingji's frustration was directly manifested in the way he and Huimao were making faces and sticking out their tongues at each other on Silin's shoulder. This was the first time Zhen Xingji had seen a cat with such rich expressions and a mouth full of lies. Ernest had been researching the secret of Zhen Xingfu and the others' bodies changing overnight. He hurriedly came out to greet them when he was informed that someone had come to visit. Since Anjinia had greeted him earlier, Ernest didn't dare to be too slow. He wanted to get more information out of Zhen Xingfu. However, Silin suggested a private conversation with Ernest and emphasized that he had a heart-to-heart talk with Ran earlier. Ernest's heart skipped a beat when he heard this. He felt worried for no reason. As expected, Silin told him about the nightmare taper not long after they entered the meeting room. After Ran's introduction, Silin also knew where to start and how to communicate with the people who had participated in the taper eradication operation. A long period of silence later, Ernest stood up and left. He returned with a storage device in his hand. Everything I know about the nightmare taper is in here. Ernest had tried to find other ways to solve the problem for many years, but he never made any progress. In the end, he put it aside. Silin accepted the storage device and said, "Thank you. This is all I can do. I hope you can find a way to solve the problem. I'll try my best." While Zhen Xingfu and Zhen Xingji were waiting outside, Prissa came over as well. "Where's Silin?" Prissa asked curiously. Zhen Xingji curled his lips at the meeting room's direction and said, "He's having a private conversation." The meeting room door opened just after Zhen Xingji finished speaking. Silin and Onista walked out of the meeting room one after another. Onista had already adjusted his mental state, and the smile on his face had returned. He saluted Prisa when he saw her. Prissa's gaze landed on Silin. She knew Silin better than anyone else, and she knew what Silin was capable of. She knew some of the more secretive things Silin had done in the past, including the time he destroyed Miracle's key research base at Sector C. What was it that required such a long private conversation? Prissa was curious. "I know about you, Silin. My little nephew often mentions you," Prissa said. Although Zhen Xingfu called Prissa his aunt, Silin had a feeling that the little nephew Prissa mentioned wasn't Zhen Xingfu, but someone else. "You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure."